and milestones. As he looked at the dashboard, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. The indicators were moving in the right direction, but there was much work to be done. Epilogue. Jobin knew that the journey ahead was long and fraught with challenges. But as he looked at the world map, now filled with pins representing not just crises but also opportunities, he felt hopeful. The harmonic shift was underway, and each individual had a role to play in shaping a future that was not just sustainable but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Chapter 141, The Year of Reckoning, 2023. Jobin sat in his Future Wave office, pondering the gravity of the year 2023. It was a year that demanded action, not just contemplation. The world was grappling with climate change, social inequality, and a resurgence of racism and prejudice. The timeline seemed to be teetering on the edge, but Jobin knew that it could be shifted. Chapter 142, The Social Mirror. Jobin activated a new Future Wave feature called the Social Mirror, which used data analytics to reflect societal issues like racism, prejudice, and other forms of injustice. It was a wake-up call, a mirror held up to society to provoke change. Chapter 143, Step 1, Acknowledge and Educate. The first step in regenerating society was acknowledgement and education. Jobin launched an educational series on Future Wave that tackled the history and psychology behind racism, prejudice, and social inequality. Chapter 144, Step 2, Open Dialogues. Jobin initiated open dialogues on Future Wave, a safe space for people to discuss sensitive topics like race, gender, and religion. The aim was to foster understanding and dismantle stereotypes. Chapter 145, Step 3, Policy Advocacy. Jobin knew that real change required systemic action. He used Future Wave to launch a policy advocacy campaign, encouraging users to petition for laws that promote social justice, such as police reform and equal opportunity employment. Chapter 146, Step 4, Economic Inclusion. Jobin introduced inclusive markets on Future Wave, a platform where minority-owned businesses could gain visibility and support. This was a step towards economic inclusion, a crucial element in combating social injustice. Chapter 147, Step 5, Community Building. Jobin believed in the power of community. He launched community circles, local groups that met regularly to discuss and act on social issues. These circles were empowered with resources and tools to make a tangible impact. Chapter 148, Step 6, Mental Health Support. Recognizing the psychological toll of social injustice, Jobin introduced wellness pods on Future Wave. These were virtual support groups led by mental health professionals, focusing on the needs of marginalized communities. Chapter 149, Step 7, Celebrate Diversity. Jobin organized a global festival of diversity on Future Wave, celebrating the richness of human culture. It was a reminder of the beauty that could be found in our differences. Chapter 150, Step 8, Accountability and Transparency. Jobin implemented a social accountability score for corporations and governments on Future Wave. This score was based on their efforts to combat social injustice and was publicly displayed for all to see. Chapter 151, The 2030 Vision. Jobin outlined the vision for 2030, a world where social justice was not an ideal but a reality, where the timeline had been shifted to prioritize empathy, understanding, and collective well-being. Chapter 152, The Ripple Effect. As Jobin looked at the Future Wave dashboard, he saw the ripple effect of these initiatives. The timeline was shifting, ever so slightly, towards a more positive, harmonious future. Epilogue. Jobin knew that the work was far from over, but as he looked at the social mirror, he saw fewer blemishes and more potential. It was a testament to the power of collective action, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. Jobin activated a new future wave feature called the justice algorithm, designed to identify systemic issues in society, such as racial profiling and gender discrimination. It was a tool to hold institutions accountable and drive change. Chapter 155, Step 1, Grassroots Movements. Jobin believed that change starts at the grassroots level. He launched Grassroots Central on FutureWave, a hub for local activists to organize, share resources, and collaborate on social justice initiatives. Chapter 156, Step 2, Media Literacy. Jobin introduced a media literacy program on FutureWave, aimed at educating people on how to discern fact from fiction, especially in the context of social issues. This would help combat misinformation and prejudice. Chapter 157, Step 3, Restorative Justice. Jobin was a proponent of restorative justice as a means to heal communities. He initiated a program on FutureWave that connected trained facilitators with communities in need, aiming to resolve conflicts and repair harm. Chapter 158, Step 4, Financial Literacy. Jobin launched a financial literacy program targeted at marginalized communities. By empowering people with the knowledge to manage their finances, he aimed to close the economic gap that often perpetuates social injustice. Chapter 159, Step 5, Environmental Justice. Jobin integrated environmental justice into FutureWave's sustainability initiatives. He launched campaigns to clean up polluted areas and provide green spaces in underserved communities. Chapter 160, Step 6, Inclusive Education. Jobin introduced an inclusive curriculum feature on FutureWave, offering educational resources that celebrate diversity and teach the history and contributions of marginalized groups. Chapter 161, Step 7, Fair Representation. Jobin used FutureWave to launch a campaign advocating for fair representation of all ethnicities, genders, and orientations in media, politics, and corporate leadership. Chapter 162, Step 8, Mental Health for All. Recognizing the universal importance of mental well-being, Jobin expanded FutureWave's wellness pods to include resources on coping with the psychological impact of discrimination and social injustice. Chapter 163, The 2030 Goals. Jobin outlined the goals for 2030, a world where justice is the norm, not the exception, where the timeline has shifted to prioritize human dignity, compassion, and the well-being of the planet. Chapter 164, The Butterfly Effect. As Jobin reviewed the analytics on FutureWave, he saw the early signs of a butterfly effect. Small actions were leading to significant impacts, and the timeline was showing subtle but promising shifts. Chapter 165, The Year of Transformation, 2023. Jobin sat in his FutureWave office, contemplating the immense challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The year 2023 was not just another year, it was a year of transformation. The timeline was at a critical juncture, and the actions taken now would echo into the future. Chapter 166, The Empathy Engine. Jobin activated a new feature on FutureWave called the Empathy Engine. This AI-driven tool was designed to foster empathy by simulating different life experiences, allowing users to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Chapter 167, Step 1, Universal Basic Income. Jobin used FutureWave to launch a campaign advocating for universal basic income, UBI. By providing a financial safety net for all, UBI could be a significant step towards reducing social inequality. Chapter 168, Step 2, Renewable Energy Transition. Jobin initiated a green transition program on FutureWave, aimed at accelerating the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. This would not only combat climate change but also create new jobs. Chapter 169, Step 3, Digital Democracy. Jobin introduced a digital democracy platform on FutureWave, where citizens could directly participate in decision-making processes, thereby making governance more transparent and inclusive. Chapter 170, Step 4, Cultural Exchange Programs. Jobin launched Cultural Bridges on FutureWave, a program that facilitated cultural exchange to break down barriers and foster global unity. Chapter 171, Step 5, Decriminalization and Rehabilitation. Jobin used FutureWave to advocate for the decriminalization of minor offenses and a focus on rehabilitation over punishment, aiming to dismantle the prison industrial complex. Chapter 172, Step 6, Gender Equality. Jobin introduced a gender equality toolkit on FutureWave, offering resources to combat gender discrimination in the workplace, schools, and society at large. Chapter 173, Step 7, Mental Health First Aid. Recognizing the importance of mental health, Jobin launched a mental health first aid course on FutureWave, aimed at equipping people with the skills to assist someone experiencing a mental health crisis. Chapter 174, Step 8, Local Food Systems. Jobin initiated a local food systems program on FutureWave, encouraging communities to grow their own food, thereby reducing carbon footprints and promoting food security. Chapter 175, The 2030 Blueprint. Jobin outlined a comprehensive blueprint for 2030, envisioning a world where social, economic, and environmental systems are in harmony, and where the timeline has been shifted towards a more equitable and sustainable future. Chapter 189, The Awakening, 2023. Jobin leaned back in his chair at FutureWave, pondering the gravity of the moment. The year 2023 was a pivotal one, and the timeline seemed to be teetering on the edge. It was as if humanity was collectively holding its breath, waiting for a sign, a direction, a spark. Chapter 190, The Consciousness Grid. Jobin activated a new feature on FutureWave called the Consciousness Grid, a platform designed to connect like-minded individuals in a network of shared values and visions for the future. Chapter 191, Step 1, Anti-Discrimination Laws. Jobin used FutureWave to launch a global campaign advocating for stronger anti-discrimination laws, focusing on race, gender, and sexual orientation, to create a more equitable society. Chapter 192, Step 2, Environmental Stewardship. Jobin initiated an environmental stewardship program on FutureWave, aimed at promoting responsible use of natural resources and conservation efforts. Chapter 193, Step 3, Educational Reform. Jobin introduced an educational reform initiative on FutureWave, focusing on critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and inclusivity as core components of the curriculum. Chapter 194, Step 4, Mental Health Support. Jobin launched a mental health support program on FutureWave, offering free online counseling and resources to help individuals cope with stress, anxiety, and depression. Chapter 195, Step 5, Community Building. Jobin used FutureWave to introduce community building workshops, aimed at fostering a sense of belonging and mutual support among community members. Chapter 196, Step 6, Fair Trade Practices. Jobin advocated for fair trade practices through FutureWave, ensuring that producers in developing countries receive a fair wage and work under ethical conditions. Chapter 197, Step 7, Civic Engagement. Recognizing the importance of active participation in governance, Jobin launched a civic engagement initiative on FutureWave, encouraging people to vote, volunteer, and be part of the decision-making process. Chapter 198, Step 8, Media Literacy. Jobin introduced a media literacy program on FutureWave, aimed at equipping people with the skills to critically evaluate information and combat misinformation. Chapter 199, The 2030 Horizon. Jobin outlined a comprehensive plan for 2030, envisioning a world where the timeline had shifted towards a more equitable, sustainable, and peaceful future, where every individual could realize their full potential. Chapter 200, The Butterfly Effect. As Jobin reviewed the latest data on Future Wave, he noticed the butterfly effect taking place. Small actions were leading to significant impacts, and the timeline was showing signs of a positive shift. Epilogue. Jobin knew that the road ahead was long and filled with challenges, but he also knew that the harmonic shift was real and gaining momentum. As he closed his laptop and looked out of his office window at the setting sun, he felt a sense of hope and responsibility. The future was not a distant dream, it was being shaped here and now, and everyone had a role to play in it. This concludes the 22nd part of our novel, a narrative that explores the most likely outcomes for the predicted future of humanity, society, and climate change. It serves as both a guide and a reminder that the future is not set in stone, it is shaped by the choices we make today. As we navigate the complexities of the modern world, may we be guided by the wisdom of the ages, committed to creating a future that is not just sustainable but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Chapter 201, The Tipping Point, 2023. Jobin sat in his Future Wave office, contemplating the data on his screen. The year 2023 was a tipping point, a moment when the scales could tip in favor of a more harmonious and sustainable future or not. The stakes were high, and the timeline was fragile. Chapter 202, The Empathy Engine. Jobin activated a new feature on Future Wave called the Empathy Engine, a platform designed to share stories of people from diverse backgrounds, aiming to foster empathy and understanding among its users. Chapter 203, Step 1, Restorative Justice. Jobin used Future Wave to launch a campaign advocating for restorative justice, a system that focuses on rehabilitation and reconciliation rather than punishment, aiming to reduce crime rates and improve community relations. Chapter 204, Step 2, Renewable Energy. Jobin initiated a renewable energy program on Future Wave, aimed at promoting solar, wind, and hydro energy as sustainable alternatives to fossil fuels. Chapter 205, Step 3, Universal Basic Income. Jobin introduced a Universal Basic Income initiative on Future Wave, arguing that providing a basic income to all citizens would reduce poverty and inequality. Chapter 206, Step 4, Digital Democracy. Jobin launched a digital democracy program on Future Wave, offering a secure platform for online voting and citizen participation in governance. Chapter 207, Step 5, Inclusive Education. Jobin used Future Wave to introduce Inclusive Education, a program that aims to make education accessible and inclusive for children with disabilities. Chapter 208, Step 6, Gender Equality. Jobin advocated for gender equality through Future Wave, offering resources and platforms for discussions on breaking down gender stereotypes and promoting equality. Chapter 209, Step 7, Mental Health First Aid. Recognizing the importance of mental well-being, Jobin launched a mental health first aid initiative on Future Wave, offering training programs to equip people with the skills to help someone experiencing a mental health crisis. Chapter 210, Step 8, Ethical AI. Jobin introduced an ethical AI program on Future Wave, aimed at promoting responsible AI development that respects human rights and freedoms. Chapter 211, The 2030 Blueprint. Jobin outlined a comprehensive blueprint for 2030, envisioning a world where the timeline had shifted towards a more equitable, sustainable, and peaceful future, where every individual could realize their full potential. The future was not a distant dream, it was being shaped here and now, and everyone had a role to play in it. Jobin sat in his Future Wave office, his eyes scanning the latest global metrics. The world was at a crucial juncture, and the choices made now would echo into the future. He knew he had to be bold. Chapter 226, The Harmony Algorithm. Jobin activated a new feature on FutureWave called the Harmony Algorithm, designed to connect people with opportunities to make a positive impact, based on their skills, interests, and location. Chapter 227, Step 1, Community Gardens. Jobin launched a Community Gardens initiative on FutureWave, encouraging people to grow their own food locally, thereby reducing the carbon footprint associated with food transportation. Chapter 228, Step 2, Fair Trade. Jobin initiated a fair trade program on FutureWave, aimed at promoting ethical consumer choices that support sustainable development and worker rights. Chapter 229, Step 3, Civic Education. Jobin introduced a civic education initiative on FutureWave, offering resources to educate people about their rights and responsibilities as citizens, aiming to foster a more engaged and informed populace. Chapter 230, Step 4, Mental Health Support Groups. Jobin launched a mental health support groups feature on FutureWave, offering a safe space for people to discuss their mental health challenges and seek peer support. Chapter 231, Step 5, Art for Social Change. Jobin used FutureWave to introduce Art for Social Change, a program that encourages artists to address social issues through their work, thereby raising awareness and inspiring action. Chapter 232, Step 6, Restorative Conversations. Jobin advocated for restorative conversations through FutureWave, offering a platform for facilitated dialogues between victims and offenders, aiming to heal wounds and restore community trust. Chapter 233, Step 7, Renewable Energy Grants. Recognizing the urgency of the climate crisis, Jobin launched a Renewable Energy Grants initiative on FutureWave, offering financial incentives for the adoption of renewable energy solutions. Chapter 234, Step 8, Youth Leadership Programs. Jobin introduced a Youth Leadership Programs feature on FutureWave, aimed at empowering the next generation of leaders with the skills and knowledge to make a positive impact. Chapter 235, The 2030 Roadmap. Jobin outlined a comprehensive roadmap for 2030, envisioning a world where the timeline had shifted towards a more equitable, sustainable, and peaceful future, where every individual could realize their full potential. Chapter 236, The Butterfly Effect. As Jobin reviewed the latest data on FutureWave, he noticed the butterfly effect taking place. Small actions were leading to significant impacts, and the timeline was showing signs of a positive shift. Epilogue. Jobin knew that the road ahead was long and filled with challenges, but he also knew that the harmonic shift was real and gaining momentum. As he closed his laptop and looked out of his office window at the setting sun, he felt a sense of hope and responsibility. The future was not a distant dream, it was being shaped here and now, and everyone had a role to play in it. Chapter 237, The Catalyst, 2023. Jobin sat in his FutureWave office, pondering the gravity of the moment. The world was at a tipping point, and the actions taken now would set the course for the future. He knew it was time for a catalyst. Chapter 238, The Empathy Engine. Jobin activated a new feature on FutureWave called the Empathy Engine, designed to foster understanding and compassion by connecting people from different backgrounds for meaningful conversations. Chapter 239, Step 1, Digital Town Halls. Jobin launched a Digital Town Halls initiative on FutureWave, providing a platform for communities to discuss local issues, brainstorm solutions, and take collective action. Chapter 240, Step 2, Skill Sharing. Jobin initiated a skill sharing program on FutureWave, allowing people to offer or request skills, from coding to cooking, fostering a culture of mutual aid and lifelong learning. Chapter 241, Step 3, Conflict Resolution Workshops. Jobin introduced a Conflict Resolution Workshops feature on FutureWave, offering training in mediation and negotiation skills to help resolve disputes peacefully. Chapter 242, Step 4, Universal Basic Income Trials. Jobin launched a Universal Basic Income Trials initiative on FutureWave, partnering with governments to test the impact of providing a basic income to all citizens. Chapter 243, Step 5, Eco-Friendly Transportation. Jobin used FutureWave to introduce eco-friendly transportation, a program that promotes the use of electric vehicles, bicycles, and public transport to reduce carbon emissions. Chapter 244, Step 6, Cultural Exchange Programs. Jobin advocated for cultural exchange programs through FutureWave, offering opportunities for people to experience different cultures, thereby fostering global understanding and reducing prejudice. Chapter 245, Step 7, Ocean Cleanup Projects. Recognizing the environmental crisis, Jobin launched an Ocean Cleanup Projects initiative on FutureWave, aiming to remove plastic waste from the oceans and protect marine life. Chapter 246, Step 8, Mental Health First Aid. Jobin introduced a mental health first aid program on FutureWave, training people to recognize the signs of mental health issues and offer initial help. Chapter 247, The 2030 Blueprint. Jobin outlined a comprehensive blueprint for 2030, envisioning a world where the timeline had shifted towards a more equitable, sustainable, and peaceful future, where every individual could realize their full potential. The planet's last stand. He took a sip of his drink and thought about the Earth, a fragile blue dot in the vastness of space. Conservation efforts were making headway, and a new wave of environmental activism was sweeping across the globe. The youth were not just the leaders of tomorrow, they were the warriors of today, fighting for a planet they would inherit in ruins or in recovery. The choice was ours to make. Jobin's Gonzo Manifesto. Inspired by the raw honesty of Bukowski and the fearless journalism of Thompson, Jobin pulled out his notepad. He began to write his manifesto, a Gonzo-style narrative laced with uncomfortable truths and audacious hopes. He wrote about the need for a cultural shift, a re-evaluation of our values and priorities. He wrote about the importance of empathy, compassion, and collective action. He wrote about the signs: the melting ice caps, the social unrest, the technological advancements and what they truly signified, a call to action, a plea for change. When he was done, he didn't just put the notepad away. He stood up, paid his tab, and walked out into the night, his manifesto tucked under his arm. He was going to get it published, come hell or high water. The Gonzo Dawn. As Jobin walked through the empty streets, he felt a strange sense of optimism. The world was on the brink, teetering between destruction and salvation, but it was also ripe for transformation. Armed with the wisdom of his literary heroes and the urgency of the times, Jobin knew that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. The sun began to rise, casting its first light on a world in desperate need of illumination. Jobin felt it in his bones, the dawn of a new era was upon us, and he was ready to play his part, however small, in the Gonzo saga of human history. This chapter aims to capture the most probable trajectories for humanity, society, and the planet based on current data and trends as of 2023. While the future remains uncertain, recognizing the signs and understanding their implications can guide us towards a more sustainable and just world. The wallpaper was peeling, and the air conditioner buzzed like a hive of discontented bees. He was on the road, a modern-day nomad seeking the pulse of a world in flux. The climate's point of no return. He flipped open his laptop and scanned the latest climate reports. The data was grim, irreversible tipping points were closer than ever. The Amazon was nearing a point of becoming a carbon source rather than a sink. Coral reefs were dying at an alarming rate. But Jobin also saw glimmers of hope. Global carbon pricing initiatives were gaining traction, and reforestation projects were sprouting up like never before. The question was, could these efforts outpace the damage? The answer was unclear, but the fight was far from over. The social revolution. Jobin received a notification about a massive protest for social justice and income equality. The streets were filled with people of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs, united in their demand for a better world. He thought about the social revolutions of the past and how they had shaped the present. The signs were there, a new era of activism and civic engagement was dawning. The digital age had democratized information, but it had also polarized societies. The challenge was to use this tool for unity rather than division. The planet's final plea. His phone buzzed with a news alert: another species declared extinct. It was a sobering reminder of the planet's fragility. But alongside the bad news were stories of innovation, advancements in clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and wildlife conservation. The planet was sending us signals, loud and clear. It was a plea for stewardship, a call to action that could not be ignored. Jobin's Gonzo revelation. Inspired by Bukowski's brutal honesty and Thompson's relentless pursuit of truth, Jobin began to type. His words were a cocktail of facts and fervor, a Gonzo revelation for a world in need of a wake-up call. He wrote about the signs, the social upheavals, the environmental milestones, the technological breakthroughs, and what they meant for the future. These were not just isolated events, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, indicators of a world at a crossroads. He hit publish, but this time, he felt a different kind of satisfaction. It wasn't just about putting his thoughts out into the ether, it was about contributing to a collective consciousness, a global dialogue that was growing louder with each passing day. The Gonzo Horizon. As Jobin packed his bags and checked out of the motel, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and setbacks, but it was also a road of infinite possibilities. The horizon was calling, and he was ready to answer. With the spirit of Bukowski and Thompson as his guides, Jobin stepped into his car and drove towards the rising sun. The world was a book, and he was ready to write the next chapter, armed with the knowledge that the pen was mightier than the sword, and the truth was the ultimate weapon in the battle for the soul of humanity. The climate's last gambit. He opened a news app on his phone. The headlines were a cacophony of despair and urgency: last chance to save the polar ice, global CO2 levels reach new highs. But tucked between the apocalyptic news were stories of hope: countries committing to net zero emissions, cities adopting green infrastructure, and communities transitioning to sustainable practices. The climate crisis was a ticking time bomb, but humanity was finally starting to defuse it, wire by wire. The social kaleidoscope. A group of protesters marched by the cafe, their signs demanding social justice, equal rights, and an end to corruption. Jobin was reminded of the 1960s, a decade of upheaval and transformation. The signs were clear: society was at a tipping point. The digital age had given voice to the voiceless, but it had also given rise to misinformation and extremism. The challenge was to filter the noise and listen to the signal, to find harmony in a world of discord. The planet's silent roar. Jobin received an alert about a massive reforestation project that had just been greenlit. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The Earth was fighting back, not with words, but with actions: natural disasters as wake-up calls, species revival as signs of resilience. The planet didn't need saving, it needed understanding, respect, and responsible stewardship. Jobin's Gonzo Testament. Fueled by Bukowski's disdain for pretense and Thompson's quest for radical honesty, Jobin began to write. His words were a synthesis of observation and introspection, a Gonzo testament to the complexity of human existence. He wrote about the signs, the political shifts, the climate milestones, the societal movements and their implications for the future. These were not mere events, they were the symptoms and cures of a world in metamorphosis. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a seismic shift within him. It was as if he had tapped into a universal truth, a cosmic rhythm that pulsed through the veins of reality. The Gonzo Frontier. Jobin closed his laptop and left the cafe, stepping into the river of humanity that flowed through the city streets. He felt invigorated, as if he had drunk from the fountain of clarity. The future was a landscape of endless possibilities, a frontier to be explored and understood. With Bukowski's cynicism and Thompson's audacity as his compass, Jobin ventured forth into the great unknown. He was no longer a passive observer, he was an active participant in the unfolding drama of existence. This chapter aims to capture the most probable trajectories for humanity, society, and the planet based on current data and trends as of 2023. While the future is a labyrinth of uncertainties, recognizing the signs and interpreting them wisely can light the path toward a more enlightened and sustainable world. He was alone, save for a notebook and a pen, his weapons of choice in a world at war with itself. The climate's final ultimatum. He received a satellite notification on his rugged outdoor phone. The latest climate models were in, and they were as unforgiving as the desert sun. Sea levels were rising faster than predicted, and extreme weather events were becoming the norm. But amid the grim forecasts were glimmers of hope. Global cooperation on climate mitigation was at an all-time high, and green technologies were advancing at a breakneck pace. The climate had given humanity an ultimatum, and for the first time, it seemed like we were listening. The social labyrinth. Jobin scrolled through a feed of global news. Protests in one country, elections in another, and everywhere, a sense of unrest and transformation. The world was a labyrinth, but people were beginning to find their way, guided by the compass of social justice, equality, and ethical governance. The digital age had created a maze of misinformation, but it had also given us the tools to navigate through it. The signs were there, written on the walls of history and the tweets of activists. The planet's resilience. An alert popped up about the successful cloning of an extinct animal species. It was a small step in the grand scheme of things, but a significant one. The Earth was showing its resilience, its ability to heal and regenerate when given a chance. Conservation was no longer a fringe movement, it was a global imperative. The planet was not a silent victim, it was a resilient survivor, and its signs of recovery were messages of hope. Jobin's Gonzo Chronicle. Inspired by Bukowski's raw emotion and Thompson's fearless scrutiny, Jobin took out his notebook. He began to write his chronicle, a gonzo tapestry of facts, feelings, and existential musings. He wrote about the signs, the climate milestones, the societal awakenings, the planetary rebounds and their profound implications. These were not isolated phenomena, they were interconnected threads in the fabric of reality. He finished writing, but instead of hitting publish, he closed the notebook. This chronicle was not for the world, it was for him a personal manifesto, a blueprint for action. The Gonzo Odyssey. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Jobin felt a sense of profound clarity. The future was not a distant realm, it was here, now, unfolding in every choice and action. He was not just a spectator, he was a co-creator in the cosmic drama of existence. With Bukowski's skepticism and Thompson's audacity as his guiding stars, Jobin packed his notebook and began the journey back to civilization. He was returning not as the man he was, but as the man he needed to be, a gonzo pilgrim on an odyssey toward a future that was yet to be written but was begging to be lived. The kind of sanctuary where Bukowski would have sought refuge from the madness and Thompson would have researched the underbelly of the American dream. He sat down, opened his laptop, and connected to the world once more. The climate's swaying scale. His eyes scanned the latest climate reports. The news was a mixed bag. Emissions had decreased in some sectors but increased in others. Renewable energy was on the rise, yet so were natural disasters. The scale was swaying, teetering on the edge of irreversible change and hopeful transformation. The climate was a mirror reflecting humanity's choices, and the image was becoming increasingly clear. The social tapestry. Jobin received a message about a new grassroots movement advocating for universal health care and education. It was gaining momentum, transcending borders and cultures. The social fabric was being rewoven, thread by thread, into a tapestry that reflected the diversity and unity of human experience. The digital age had torn holes in this fabric, but it was also providing the tools to mend it. The signs were written in hashtags and headlines, in the voices that refused to be silenced. The planet's whisper. An article caught his eye, a breakthrough in coral reef restoration. It was a whisper from the planet, a subtle yet powerful message that life could flourish again if given the chance. Conservation was no longer a niche concern, it was a global dialogue, a conversation between humanity and the Earth. The planet was whispering its secrets, and we were finally learning to listen. Jobin's Gonzo Manifesto, Redux. Inspired by Bukowski's unvarnished truth and Thompson's relentless courage, Jobin began to write. His words were a Gonzo manifesto for a new era, a fusion of fact and sentiment, a call to arms for a world on the brink. He wrote about the signs, the climate's swaying scale, the social tapestry, the planet's whisper, and their intricate dance with destiny. These were not mere events, they were the notes in a symphony of choices, a melody that could either harmonize with the rhythms of nature or clash in discord. He hit publish, but this time, he felt a sense of communion. It was as if his words were not just his own but part of a collective consciousness, a shared vision for a future that was still within reach. The Gonzo Nexus. As Jobin closed his laptop and left the library, he felt a newfound sense of agency. The future was not a fixed point on the horizon, it was a nexus of possibilities, shaped by the choices of the present. He was not just an observer, he was a participant, a co-author in the unfolding narrative of reality. With Bukowski's grit and Thompson's audacity lighting his way, Jobin stepped into the bustling streets, ready to engage with the world in all its complexity and contradiction. He was armed with the most potent weapon of all, the knowledge that the future was not a gift but a responsibility, a Gonzo quest for a world reborn through the alchemy of choice and action. Jobin found himself in an art gallery, surrounded by expressions of human emotion and thought, the kind of place where Bukowski might have scoffed at the pretentiousness and Thompson would have seen through the veneer to the raw essence of society. He was there for an exhibit on climate change, a fusion of art and science aimed at provoking thought and inspiring action. The climate's silent roar. He stood before a painting that depicted a burning forest juxtaposed with a pristine glacier. It was a silent roar from the climate, a visual representation of the urgency and duality of the crisis. But alongside this painting were others that showcased solutions, communities coming together to fight deforestation, engineers developing new forms of clean energy. The climate was a canvas, and humanity held the brush. The social mosaic. Jobin received a news alert about a landmark legal decision that set a precedent for social equality. It was a piece in the mosaic of societal change, a sign that the arc of history was bending, however slowly, toward justice. The digital age had shattered old norms, but it was also facilitating the assembly of a new social contract. The signs were etched in court decisions and social media campaigns, in the stories that challenged the status quo. The planet's pulse. A sculpture caught his eye, a heart made from recycled materials, beating through a mechanical contraption. It was the planet's pulse, a testament to its resilience and a call for sustainable living. Conservation was no longer an option, it was a necessity, a rhythm that humanity needed to sync with for mutual survival. The planet was alive, and its pulse was a sign of both vulnerability and strength. Jobin's Gonzo Codex. Inspired by Bukowski's brutal simplicity and Thompson's daring exploration, Jobin took out his phone and began to write. His words were a Gonzo codex for the future, a blend of realism and idealism, a guidebook for navigating the labyrinth of existence. He wrote about the signs, the climate's silent roar, the social mosaic, the planet's pulse, and their role in shaping the architecture of tomorrow. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of unity. It was as if his words were threads in a larger tapestry, woven together by the collective will of a society yearning for change. The Gonzo Continuum. As Jobin left the gallery, he felt a sense of interconnectedness. The future was not an isolated destination, it was a continuum, a series of interconnected moments that formed the tapestry of reality. He was not a lone actor, he was part of an ensemble cast, each playing their role in the drama of existence. With Bukowski's disdain for illusion and Thompson's quest for the unvarnished truth as his beacons, Jobin stepped into the night, ready to be both a witness and a catalyst in the unfolding saga of the human condition. The climate's underground murmurs. As he waited for the train, he read an article about a new form of carbon capture technology that was showing promising results. It was as if the climate's concerns had seeped into the underground, whispering through the tunnels and tracks. The technology was still in its infancy, but it was a sign that humanity was beginning to listen to the murmurs of its own impact. The social labyrinth. Jobin received a text about a community outreach program aimed at bridging social divides. It was a thread in the labyrinthine tapestry of social progress, a sign that the walls separating us were beginning to crumble. The digital age had isolated us in ideological echo chambers, but it was also providing the means to navigate the labyrinth and find common ground. The planet's subterranean pulse. A news alert popped up about a major river cleanup initiative that had successfully revitalized local ecosystems. It was the planet's subterranean pulse, a sign that the Earth's veins were not clogged beyond repair. Conservation was becoming a reflex, an instinctive response to the planet's vital signs. The Earth was not a silent backdrop, it was a living, breathing entity with a pulse that could be felt even in the depths of a subway station. Jobin's Gonzo Symphony. Inspired by Bukowski's unfiltered observations and Thompson's incisive wit, Jobin took out his notebook. He began to write his Gonzo Symphony, a composition that blended the melodies of fact and the rhythms of emotion. He wrote about the signs, the climate's underground murmurs, the social labyrinth, the planet's subterranean pulse, and their role in the unfolding symphony of reality. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of harmonic resonance. It was as if his words had struck a chord that reverberated through the layers of society, echoing in the hearts and minds of those who dared to listen. The Gonzo Continuum Revisited. As Jobin boarded the train and it pulled away from the station, he felt a sense of temporal continuity. The future was not a distant terminus, it was a series of stations along a journey that had no end. He was not a passive passenger, he was an active conductor, guiding the train through the twists and turns of the human saga. With Bukowski's poetic realism and Thompson's investigative fervor as his navigational aids, Jobin rode into the tunnel, ready to explore the dark corners and bright vistas of a world in perpetual motion. Jobin removed the VR headset and took out his phone. He began to write his Gonzo Reckoning, a narrative that questioned the dualities of the modern world. He wrote about the signs, the climate's virtual echo, the social mirror, the planet's digital pulse, and their role in the reckoning of these dualities. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of equilibrium. It was as if his words had balanced the scales, adding a counterweight to the heavy issues that threatened to tip the world into chaos. The Gonzo Nexus Reimagined. As Jobin left the arcade, he felt a sense of interconnectedness. The future was not a single thread, it was a nexus of possibilities, each influenced by the choices made in both the virtual and real worlds. He was not an observer, he was a participant, a node in the network of humanity's collective destiny. With Bukowski's raw honesty and Thompson's investigative zeal as his compass, Jobin stepped into the bustling streets, ready to navigate the intricate nexus of a world caught between reality and simulation, despair and hope. With a map and a compass, tools symbolic of his quest to navigate the uncertain waters of the future. The climate's oceanic whisper. As he adjusted the sails, he received a notification about a breakthrough in oceanic conservation. New marine reserves had been established, protecting critical ecosystems. It was as if the ocean itself was whispering its gratitude, a sign that humanity was beginning to respect the boundaries of nature. The climate was a vast ocean of challenges and opportunities, its signs manifesting in the whispers of the wind and the currents below. The Social Archipelago. Jobin's phone buzzed with news of a peace treaty resolving a long-standing conflict between two nations. It was a single island in the archipelago of social progress, a sign that humanity could overcome its divisions and find common ground. The digital age had created virtual islands of ideology, but it was also facilitating the bridges to connect them. The signs were in the diplomatic cables and peace rallies, in the islands of sanity amidst seas of discord. The planet's nautical pulse. An article caught his eye about a successful reforestation project that had not only revived local flora but also brought back several endangered species. It was the planet's nautical pulse, a sign that the Earth's heart was still beating strong, capable of regeneration and renewal. The planet was not a static backdrop, it was a dynamic entity with a pulse that could be felt even in the remotest corners of the ocean. Jobin's gonzo cartography. Inspired by Bukowski's gritty realism and Thompson's fearless exploration, Jobin took out his map and began to write. His words were a gonzo cartography, a mapping of the known and the unknown, a guide for sailing the tumultuous seas of existence. He wrote about the signs, the climate's oceanic whisper, the social archipelago, the planet's nautical pulse and their role in the cartography of possibilities. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of alignment with the cosmic tides. It was as if his words had set a course that resonated with the fundamental forces of nature, steering humanity toward a horizon of hope and balance. The gonzo horizon unveiled. As Jobin lowered the sails and anchored for the night, he felt a sense of cosmic humility. The future was not a fixed point on the horizon, it was the horizon itself, ever shifting and expanding with each decision and discovery. He was not a lone sailor, he was part of a fleet, each vessel carrying its own cargo of dreams and fears, hopes and regrets. With Bukowski's unflinching gaze and Thompson's untamed spirit as his navigational stars, Jobin looked toward the horizon, ready to sail into the unfolding mystery of tomorrow. This chapter aims to capture the most probable outcomes for humanity, society, and the planet based on current data and trends as of 2023. The future is an ever-expanding horizon of choices and consequences, and understanding the signs can help us set a course toward a more sustainable and harmonious world. Jobin found himself in an abandoned factory, a relic of industrialization now overrun by nature. It was the kind of place where Bukowski would have seen the decay of human ambition, and Thompson would have probed the societal shifts that led to such desolation. Jobin was there with a camera, capturing the stark contrasts that spoke volumes about the state of the world in 2025. The climate's wasteland echo. As he framed a shot of a rusted machine juxtaposed against a thriving tree, he received a notification about a global initiative to transition to renewable energy sources. It was as if the wasteland was echoing a promise of renewal, a sign that humanity was finally taking steps to reverse its own destruction. The climate was a wasteland of missed opportunities, but also a fertile ground for transformative action. The social mosaic. Jobin's phone vibrated with news of a landmark legislation that aimed to provide universal health care and education. It was a piece in the mosaic of social progress, a sign that the cracks in the system were being filled with the cement of empathy and justice. The digital age had fragmented us, but it was also enabling the assembly of a more cohesive social mosaic. The signs were in the policies and protests, in the pieces that were coming together to form a picture of a better world. The planet's industrial pulse. An article popped up about the successful conversion of a defunct factory into a sustainable urban farm. It was the planet's industrial pulse, a sign that the Earth's scars could heal and even become sources of life. The planet was not a dumping ground, it was a canvas for human creativity and ingenuity, capable of transformation and renewal. Jobin's gonzo alchemy. Inspired by Bukowski's raw observations and Thompson's incisive commentary, Jobin put down his camera and took out his phone. He began to write his gonzo alchemy, a narrative that sought to transmute the base metals of current events into the gold of wisdom and action. He wrote about the signs, the climate's wasteland echo, the social mosaic, the planet's industrial pulse and their role in the alchemy of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of cosmic synergy. It was as if his words had catalyzed a reaction, accelerating the rate of change and pushing the world closer to a tipping point of positive transformation. The Gonzo Frontier reimagined. As Jobin left the factory, he felt a sense of historical continuity. The future was not a blank slate, it was a frontier, a vast expanse where the old and the new coexisted, each shaping the other in a cycle of decay and renewal. With Bukowski's unvarnished truth and Thompson's relentless curiosity as his guides, Jobin stepped into the twilight, ready to explore the ever-changing frontier of a world in flux. Jobin was there with a telescope, gazing into the vastness of the universe, pondering the fate of a tiny blue dot called Earth. The climate's cosmic murmur. As he adjusted the telescope to view a distant nebula, his phone buzzed with news of a significant decrease in global carbon emissions. It was as if the cosmos itself was murmuring its approval, a sign that humanity was beginning to harmonize with the natural rhythms of the planet. The climate was a cosmic dance, its signs manifesting in the subtle shifts of temperature and the grand movements of celestial bodies. The social galaxy. Jobin received a notification about a global summit focused on income inequality and social justice. It was a star in the galaxy of human cooperation, a sign that the world was slowly aligning its social orbits. The digital age had created isolated planets of self-interest, but it was also facilitating the gravitational pull of collective action. The signs were in the treaties and manifestos, in the stars that were forming constellations of change. The planet's astral pulse. An article flashed on his screen about the discovery of a new species in a previously unexplored forest. It was the planet's astral pulse, a sign that Earth was still a living, breathing entity, full of mysteries and miracles. The planet was not a static stage, it was a dynamic actor in the cosmic drama, its pulse resonating with the frequencies of the universe. Jobin's Gonzo choreography. Inspired by Bukowski's existential musings and Thompson's cosmic inquiries, Jobin put down his telescope and picked up his phone. He began to write his Gonzo choreography, a narrative that wove the intricate steps of the cosmic dance into a tapestry of meaning and action. He wrote about the signs, the climate's cosmic murmur, the social galaxy, the planet's astral pulse and their role in the celestial choreography of change. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of cosmic unity. It was as if his words had become a part of the celestial choreography, a sequence of movements that were guiding the world toward a harmonious future. The Gonzo constellation illuminated. As Jobin packed up his telescope and prepared to leave the desert, he felt a sense of cosmic belonging. The future was not a dark void, it was a constellation, a pattern of stars that told a story of hope and transformation. Jobin found himself in a labyrinth, a maze of high walls and twisting paths. It was the kind of place where Bukowski would have seen the complexity of human folly, and Thompson would have explored the psychological dimensions of choice and consequence. Jobin was there with a notebook and a pen, tools to map out the intricate geometry of the world's challenges and opportunities. The climate's geometric echo. As he navigated a particularly tricky section of the maze, his phone alerted him to a new international agreement aimed at protecting biodiversity. It was as if the labyrinth itself was echoing a pattern of hope, a sign that humanity was beginning to understand the geometric intricacies of ecological balance. The climate was a labyrinth of variables, its signs manifesting in the symmetry of ice crystals and the fractals of river deltas. The social polyhedron. Jobin's phone vibrated with news of a grassroots movement that had successfully lobbied for criminal justice reform. It was a facet in the polyhedron of social progress, a sign that society was adding dimensions of fairness and compassion to its structure. The digital age had flattened our perspectives, but it was also enabling the construction of a more complex social geometry. The signs were in the petitions and platforms, in the facets that were coming together to form a more equitable shape. The planet's topological pulse. An article popped up about a community that had turned a landfill into a lush park. It was the planet's topological pulse, a sign that Earth's surface could be molded and transformed for the better. The planet was not a two-dimensional plane, it was a topological space of hills and valleys, capable of dramatic change and renewal. Jobin's gonzo geometry. Inspired by Bukowski's gritty scrutiny and Thompson's labyrinthine thoughts, Jobin sat down in a quiet corner of the maze and began to write. His words were a gonzo geometry, a mapping of the world's complexities into comprehensible shapes and forms. He wrote about the signs, the climate's geometric echo, the social polyhedron, the planet's topological poles and their role in the geometry of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of geometric clarity. It was as if his words had aligned the angles and curves of the world, guiding humanity toward a more coherent and sustainable form. The gonzo labyrinth solved. As Jobin found his way out of the labyrinth, he felt a sense of intellectual satisfaction. The future was not a straight line, it was a labyrinth, a complex path that required attention, understanding, and the occasional backtrack. With Bukowski's unfiltered realism and Thompson's intricate analysis as his navigational aids, Jobin emerged from the labyrinth, ready to tackle the next complex puzzle that the world would inevitably present. Jobin was there with a sketchbook, capturing the intricate patterns that spoke to the interconnectedness of all things. The climate's woven whisper. As he sketched a complex weave, his phone buzzed with news of a breakthrough in carbon capture technology. It was as if the tapestry itself was whispering a secret, a sign that humanity was beginning to stitch together a more sustainable future. The climate was a tapestry of interwoven systems, its signs manifesting in the delicate balance of ecosystems and the complex interactions of weather patterns. The social fabric. Jobin received a notification about a global initiative to eradicate poverty by 2040. It was a thread in the social fabric, a sign that humanity was weaving a more equitable and compassionate world. The digital age had unraveled many social bonds, but it was also enabling the rewebbing of a stronger, more resilient fabric. The signs were in the policies and partnerships, in the threads that were strengthening the weave of social justice. The planet's textured pulse. An article flashed on his screen about the successful restoration of a coral reef. It was the planet's textured pulse, a sign that Earth was a living tapestry of diverse habitats and species. The planet was not a flat canvas, it was a textured surface, rich in complexity and nuance, capable of regeneration and renewal. Jobin's gonzo weave. Inspired by Bukowski's raw observations and Thompson's intricate narratives, Jobin put down his sketchbook and picked up his phone. He began to write his gonzo weave, a narrative that threaded the complex patterns of the world into a coherent tapestry of meaning and action. He wrote about the signs, the climate's woven whisper, the social fabric, the planet's textured pulse and their role in the tapestry of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of interconnectedness. It was as if his words had become a part of the global tapestry, a pattern that was guiding humanity toward a more harmonious and sustainable weave. The gonzo tapestry unveiled. As Jobin left the factory, he felt a sense of artistic fulfillment. The future was not a blank sheet, it was a tapestry, a complex pattern that told a story of struggle and triumph, decay and renewal. With Bukowski's unvarnished truth and Thompson's relentless curiosity as his guides, Jobin walked away from the looms, ready to contribute his own threads to the ever-evolving tapestry of a world in transformation. The climate's harmonic resonance. As he tuned his violin, his phone buzzed with news of a global reforestation project that had just reached its billionth tree. It was as if the symphony itself was resonating with the harmony of nature, a sign that humanity was beginning to play in tune with the planet. The climate was a symphony of interrelated elements, its signs manifesting in the harmony of ecosystems and the rhythms of natural cycles. The social orchestra. Jobin received a notification about a new universal basic income program that had been successfully implemented in several countries. It was a note in the social orchestra, a sign that humanity was learning to play together in a more equitable and harmonious composition. The digital age had created cacophonies of discord, but it was also enabling the arrangement of a more melodious social score. The signs were in the laws and initiatives, in the notes that were harmonizing to form a more equitable melody. The planet's vibrational pulse. An article popped up about the discovery of a new method to clean the oceans of plastic waste. It was the planet's vibrational pulse, a sign that Earth was a resonating body, sensitive to the frequencies of human activity and capable of responding to positive change. The planet was not a silent stage, it was a vibrant instrument in the cosmic orchestra, its pulse reverberating through the music of the spheres. Jobin's Gonzo composition. Inspired by Bukowski's gritty realism and Thompson's psychedelic riffs, Jobin picked up his violin and began to play. His music was a gonzo composition, a piece that integrated the complex rhythms and harmonies of the world into a coherent and moving performance. He played about the signs, the climate's harmonic resonance, the social orchestra, the planet's vibrational pulse, and their role in the symphony of transformation. He hit publish on a written reflection of his performance, and this time, he felt a sense of musical unity. It was as if his music had become a part of the global symphony, a melody that was guiding humanity toward a more harmonious and sustainable future. The Gonzo Symphony concluded. As Jobin put down his violin and left the concert hall, he felt a sense of sonic fulfillment. The future was not a silent void, it was a symphony, a complex arrangement of notes that told a story of challenge and opportunity, discord and harmony. With Bukowski's unfiltered observations and Thompson's intricate improvisations as his musical guides, Jobin walked away from the stage, ready to listen for the next note in the ever-evolving composition of a world in transformation. Jobin found himself in an observatory, surrounded by telescopes and star charts. It was the kind of place where Bukowski would have questioned the existential point of it all, and Thompson would have delved into the cosmic implications of human folly. Jobin was there with a telescope, ready to peer into the celestial dance of the universe. The climate's galactic blueprint. As he adjusted the telescope, his phone buzzed with news of a successful transition to renewable energy in a major city. It was as if the stars themselves were aligning, a sign that humanity was beginning to follow a galactic blueprint for sustainability. The climate was a constellation of interconnected factors, its signs manifesting in the orbital patterns of weather systems and the cosmic cycles of ice ages and warm periods. The social nebula. Jobin received a notification about a peace treaty that had ended a decades-long conflict. It was a star in the social nebula, a sign that humanity was forming new constellations of cooperation and understanding. The digital age had scattered us like cosmic dust, but it was also enabling the formation of new social galaxies. The signs were in the agreements and alliances, in the stars that were coming together to form new constellations of peace. The planet's cosmic pulse. An article flashed on his screen about a breakthrough in soil regeneration techniques. It was the planet's cosmic pulse, a sign that Earth was a living entity in the cosmic dance, capable of renewal and transformation. The planet was not a static rock, it was a dynamic celestial body, its pulse echoing through the cosmic web of life. Jobin's Gonzo astronomy. Inspired by Bukowski's raw cynicism and Thompson's cosmic curiosity, Jobin sat down at a computer in the observatory and began to write. His words were a gonzo astronomy, a narrative that mapped the celestial choreography of the world into a coherent cosmic story. He wrote about the signs, the climate's galactic blueprint, the social nebula, the planet's cosmic pulse, and their role in the constellation of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of cosmic unity. It was as if his words had become a part of the universal constellation, a star that was guiding humanity toward a more harmonious and sustainable orbit. The Gonzo constellation realized. As Jobin packed up his telescope and left the observatory, he felt a sense of cosmic wonder. The future was not a dark void, it was a constellation, a complex pattern of stars that told a story of evolution and adaptation, chaos and order. With Bukowski's unflinching realism and Thompson's cosmic musings as his celestial guides, Jobin walked away from the observatory, ready to navigate the next cosmic challenge that the universe would inevitably present. Jobin was there with a VR headset, ready to explore the digital dimensions of reality. The climate's quantum state. As he calibrated the headset, his phone buzzed with news of a breakthrough in carbon capture technology. It was as if the quantum states of the climate were beginning to align, a sign that humanity was starting to understand the probabilistic nature of environmental outcomes. The climate was a quantum system, its signs manifesting in the superposition of possibilities, each choice leading to a different state of the world. The social entanglement. Jobin received a notification about the global eradication of a once deadly disease. It was a particle in the social entanglement, a sign that humanity was becoming more interconnected in a web of mutual benefit. The digital age had created isolated nodes, but it was also enabling quantum leaps in social cohesion. The signs were in the global initiatives and collaborations, in the entangled particles that were forming a more coherent social wave function. The planet's quantum leap. An article popped up about the successful reintroduction of an extinct species through gene editing. It was the planet's quantum leap, a sign that Earth was capable of jumping to new states of ecological balance. The planet was not a closed system, it was an open quantum field, its potentialities influenced by the choices and actions of its inhabitants. A narrative that integrated the complex probabilities and uncertainties of the world into a coherent quantum story. He wrote about the signs, the climate's quantum state, the social entanglement, the planet's quantum leap, and their role in the nexus of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of quantum coherence. It was as if his words had become entangled with the global wave function, influencing the probabilities of a more harmonious and sustainable future. The Gonzo Nexus unveiled. As Jobin took off his VR headset and left the chamber, he felt a sense of quantum clarity. The future was not a deterministic equation, it was a nexus of interconnected probabilities, a quantum system influenced by the choices and actions of its observers. With Bukowski's raw skepticism and Thompson's boundless curiosity as his quantum guides, Jobin walked away from the virtual reality chamber, ready to engage with the next quantum challenge that the ever-unpredictable universe would inevitably present. Jobin found himself in a room filled with clocks, calendars, and timekeeping devices of all sorts. It was a place where Bukowski would have scoffed at the human obsession with measuring the immeasurable, and Thompson would have pondered the elasticity of time under the influence of various substances. Jobin was there with a journal, ready to record the temporal intricacies of the world's unfolding narrative. The climate's temporal thread. As he opened his journal, his phone buzzed with news of a global climate agreement that had finally been ratified by all nations. It was as if the temporal threads of the climate crisis were beginning to weave a more hopeful tapestry. The climate was a timeline, its signs manifesting in the milestones of human action and natural cycles. The key to entering the good timeline was collective action, a global synchronization of efforts to mitigate and adapt. The social chronology. Jobin received a notification about a new educational initiative aimed at fostering global citizenship from a young age. It was a marker in the social chronology, a sign that humanity was learning from its historical mistakes and aiming for a more equitable future. The signs were in the reforms and revolutions, in the chronological sequence of events that were shaping a more just society. The planet's temporal harmony. An article flashed on his screen about the successful cleanup of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It was the planet's temporal harmony, a sign that Earth was capable of healing if given time and concerted effort. The planet was not a static stage, it was a dynamic actor in the temporal play of existence. Jobin's Gonzo time-traveling ethics. Inspired by Bukowski's disdain for societal norms and Thompson's relentless quest for truth, Jobin began to write. His prose was a Gonzo time-traveling ethics, a narrative that explored the moral implications of our actions across the temporal spectrum. He wrote about the signs, the climate's temporal thread, the social chronology, the planet's temporal harmony, and their role in the synchronicity of salvation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of temporal alignment. It was as if his words had become a part of the world's timeline, a fixed point that could serve as a reference for future actions. The gonzo synchronicity manifested. As Jobin closed his journal and left the room of clocks, he felt a sense of temporal responsibility. The future was not a predetermined fate, it was a synchronicity of choices and consequences, a timeline influenced by the ethical weight of our actions. The climate's algorithmic balance. As he activated the tablet, a notification popped up about a new AI system that could predict extreme weather events with unprecedented accuracy. It was as if the algorithmic balance of the climate was being recalibrated. The climate was a complex system, its signs manifesting in the data points and predictive models. To enter the good timeline, humanity needed to leverage this algorithmic wisdom to preemptively address environmental challenges. The social network of destiny. Jobin received an alert about a blockchain-based voting system that had eliminated electoral fraud in several countries. It was a node in the social network of destiny, a sign that technology could be harnessed to enhance democratic governance. The signs were in the decentralized systems and peer-to-peer networks that were democratizing power and redistributing resources. The planet's algorithmic symphony. An article appeared on his screen about a machine learning model that had optimized reforestation efforts, leading to a significant increase in global forest cover. It was the planet's algorithmic symphony, a sign that Earth's ecosystems could be harmonized through intelligent design. The planet was not a passive canvas, it was an active participant in the algorithmic orchestration of its own future. Jobin's gonzo cosmic calculus. Inspired by Bukowski's raw humanism and Thompson's radical empiricism, Jobin began to write. His prose was a gonzo cosmic calculus, a narrative that integrated the mathematical and metaphysical dimensions of existence. He wrote about the signs, the climate's algorithmic balance, the social network of destiny, the planet's algorithmic symphony and their role in the alchemy of transformation. He hit publish, and this time, he felt a sense of algorithmic harmony. It was as if his words had become a subroutine in the cosmic program, influencing the variables of a more equitable and sustainable future. The gonzo singularity realized. As Jobin powered down the tablet and left the room of quantum computers, he felt a sense of algorithmic enlightenment. The future was not a static equation, it was a dynamic algorithm, a singularity influenced by the input and feedback of its constituents. Jobin was there with a voice recorder, ready to capture the galactic perspective on humanity's future. The climate's galactic context. As he activated the recorder, a news alert came in about the discovery of a new Earth-like exoplanet. Scientists speculated that it might have a climate similar to Earth's past. This was the climate's galactic context, a sign that Earth was not unique but part of a cosmic tapestry of possibilities. To enter the good timeline, humanity needed to see its climate crisis not just as a terrestrial issue but as a cosmic responsibility. The social constellation. Jobin received a message about the United Nations adopting a new framework for global cooperation based on principles of interstellar ethics. It was a star in the social constellation, a sign that humanity was beginning to think beyond national borders and even planetary confines. The signs were in the treaties and alliances that transcended Earth, aiming for a cosmic common good. The planet's quantum quandary. An article flashed on his screen about quantum computing being used to simulate the Earth's ecosystems accurately. It was the planet's quantum quandary, a sign that the complexity of Earth could be understood and perhaps even solved at a quantum level. The planet was not just a physical entity, it was a quantum phenomenon, part of the cosmic web of existence. Jobin's gonzo galactic perspective. Inspired by Bukowski's brutal honesty and Thompson's relentless pursuit of the uncomfortable truth, Jobin began to speak into the recorder. His narrative was a gonzo galactic perspective, a tale that zoomed out from the myopic human view to encompass the cosmic scale. He spoke about the signs, the climate's galactic context, the social constellation, the planet's quantum quandary and their role in shaping a future that was not just sustainable but also cosmically aware. He hit save, and this time, he felt a sense of cosmic alignment. He was in a virtual reality conference, a digital realm where avatars of scientists, activists, and policymakers gathered to discuss the fate of the world. The walls of this virtual maze were adorned with projections of climate models, social theories, and cosmic equations. The climate's algorithmic mirror. Machine learning, said an avatar resembling a young Alan Turing, is now sophisticated enough to predict climate patterns with unprecedented accuracy. But it also shows us that if we continue on this path, we're headed for a point of no return. Jobin pondered this. The signs were clear in the algorithms, a mirror reflecting humanity's choices. To change the reflection, one had to change the object. Jobin realized that the algorithmic models were not just predictive but prescriptive, they outlined the steps needed to avert disaster. The social blockchain. Another avatar, this one resembling Rosa Parks, spoke up. Social justice is now being recorded on blockchains, immutable ledgers that track societal progress or the lack thereof. It's a sign that accountability is becoming decentralized. Jobin was intrigued. The signs were there in the blockchain's immutable code, a testament to humanity's evolving sense of justice. It was a ledger not just of transactions but of morals, ethics, and social contracts. The planet's galactic symphony. A third avatar, resembling Carl Sagan, presented a holographic model of the galaxy. We've detected signs of life microbial, not intelligent on exoplanets. It's a reminder that life is not just an earthly phenomenon but a cosmic one. Jobin felt a sense of awe. The signs were there in the microbial life forms that defied earthly boundaries, a cosmic symphony of existence. It was a sign that the universe was more interconnected than anyone had ever imagined. Jobin's Gonzo reckoning. Inspired by Bukowski's raw emotion and Thompson's fearless scrutiny, Jobin logged off and began to write. He wrote about the algorithmic mirrors of climate change, the social blockchains of justice, and the galactic symphonies of life. He wrote as if each word were a coordinate in the labyrinth, guiding humanity towards a future that is not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. The Gonzo reckoning realized. As he hit publish, Jobin felt another shift, as if the labyrinth had rearranged itself, opening a path towards a better future. He knew that the signs were not just cosmic whispers but also earthly shouts, demanding attention, action, and accountability. With Bukowski's poetic nihilism and Thompson's radical optimism fueling him, Jobin disconnected from the virtual world, ready to engage with the physical one. He understood that the key to a harmonious future lay not just in reading the signs but in being one, a sign of resilience, a sign of justice, a sign of a world reborn. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place Bukowski would have called home. The air was thick with the aroma of stale beer and cigarette smoke, a scent that was oddly comforting. He had a notebook in front of him, its pages filled with scribbles, equations, and doodles. The signs were there in the qubits and quantum states, a new frontier of computational power. It was a leap that could help humanity solve its most pressing problems, from climate change to social inequality. The social neural network. Jobin thought about the rise of decentralized social networks, platforms that were governed by the users rather than corporate overlords. It's like a neural network, but for society. Each node, each person, contributes to the collective intelligence. The signs were there in the blockchain-based IDs and peer-to-peer connections, a new paradigm for social interaction and governance. It was a network that could amplify the voices of the marginalized, a platform for true democracy. Intelligent life might be more common than we think. The signs were there in the exoplanets and cosmic phenomena, a universe teeming with possibilities. It was a reminder that humanity was part of a larger cosmic story, a narrative that could either end in tragedy or transcendence. As he wrote the last sentence, Jobin felt a seismic shift, as if the universe had realigned itself. He knew that the manifesto was not just a document but a catalyst, a spark that could ignite the collective will of humanity. With a sense of purpose that transcended his own existence, Jobin closed his notebook and left the bar. He was ready to share his manifesto with the world, to be a beacon of hope, a guide towards a future that is not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. Jobin thought about the rise of decentralized social networks, platforms that were governed by the users rather than corporate overlords. It's like a neural network, but for society. Each node, each person, contributes to the collective intelligence. The signs were there in the blockchain-based IDs and peer-to-peer connections, a new paradigm for social interaction and governance. It was a network that could amplify the voices of the marginalized, a platform for true democracy. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place Bukowski would have called home. The air was thick with the aroma of stale beer and cigarette smoke, a scent that was oddly comforting. He had a notebook in front of him, its pages filled with scribbles, equations, and doodles. This was his manifesto, his blueprint for entering the good timeline. The signs were there in the exoplanets and cosmic phenomena, a universe teeming with possibilities. It was a reminder that humanity was part of a larger cosmic story, a narrative that could either end in tragedy or transcendence. With a sense of purpose that transcended his own existence, Jobin closed his notebook and left the bar. He was ready to share his manifesto with the world, to be a beacon of hope, a guide towards a future that is not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. Jobin found himself in a makeshift studio, surrounded by a sea of microphones and cameras. The Green Renaissance. Listen up, folks, Jobin began, his voice tinged with the gravelly cadence of a Bukowski poem. We're on the cusp of a green renaissance, a rebirth of sustainable technologies and eco-conscious living. Solar, wind, geothermal, these aren't just buzzwords, there are lifelines. The signs were there in the plummeting costs of renewable energy, in the rise of electric vehicles, in the global commitment to net zero emissions. It was a renaissance that could redefine humanity's relationship with the Earth, a shift towards a more harmonious coexistence. We need to rethink our economic systems, Jobin continued, channeling the audacity of Hunter S. Thompson. Universal basic income? Nah, let's aim higher. Universal basic harmony, a system where everyone has access to education, healthcare, and a livable wage. The signs were there in the growing income inequality, in the social unrest, in the cries for justice. It was a call for a new economic paradigm, one that prioritized human well-being over corporate profits. Jobin paused, taking a sip of water as he prepared for his next revelation. We're not alone in this universe, and it's high time we act like it. I propose the formation of a galactic congress, a coalition of Earth and extraterrestrial civilizations. The signs were there in the declassified UFO reports, in the scientific search for extraterrestrial life, in the cosmic synchronicities that hinted at a larger narrative. It was a vision of a united galaxy, a federation of planets working towards a common goal. As we stand on the precipice of the future, we have two choices, Jobin concluded, his eyes ablaze with conviction. We can continue down this path of self-destruction, or we can embrace being eco-friendly. With that, Jobin stepped away from the microphones, leaving the world to ponder his words. As he exited the studio, Jobin felt a sense of serenity wash over him. He had done his part, and now it was up to humanity to do theirs. The good timeline was within reach, a future that was not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. We can enter an age of renewal, but only if we act now. The signs were there in the falling costs of renewable energy, in the advancements in battery technology, in the global youth movements demanding change. It was a call to arms, a plea to seize the moment before it was too late. The social reckoning. Jobin took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled, filling the room with a smoky haze. We also need a social reckoning, a complete overhaul of our broken systems. Universal healthcare, education, a living wage, it's all within reach. The signs were there in the protests that filled the streets, in the voices that refused to be silenced, in the grassroots movements that were gaining momentum. It was a vision of a more equitable world, a future that was not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. The cosmic perspective. But let's not forget the bigger picture, Jobin continued, his eyes narrowing as if he were sharing a cosmic secret. We're just a tiny speck in this vast universe. It's time we start acting like it. The signs were there in the scientific discoveries that expanded our understanding of the cosmos, in the philosophical debates that questioned our place in it, in the spiritual awakenings that connected us to something greater. It was a shift in perspective, a realization that we were all part of a larger whole. Listen, kid, he started, talking to the young bartender who seemed too naive for the world's harsh realities. We're heading for a collapse, a point of no return. The ice caps are melting, the forests are burning, and the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting screwed. The TV flickered with news of climate catastrophes and social unrest. He ordered another bourbon and lit a cigarette, contemplating the absurdity of it all. The signs were there in the viral hashtags, in the online petitions, in the digital currencies that promised to decentralize power. It was the digital uprising, a chance to use technology for the greater good. The green transition. Next, we focus on the green transition, Jobin continued, scribbling notes on a whiteboard. We need to retrofit our cities, invest in public transport, and make sustainable living the norm, not the exception. The signs were there in the urban gardens that sprouted on rooftops, in the bike lanes that crisscrossed the cities, in the community solar projects that powered entire neighborhoods. It was the green transition, a roadmap to a carbon-neutral future. But let's not forget the universal harmony. We need to break down the barriers that divide us: race, religion, nationality, and realize that we're all in this together. The signs were there in the interfaith dialogues that fostered understanding, in the open borders that allowed for the free flow of people and ideas, in the global initiatives that tackled poverty and disease. It was the universal harmony, a vision of a world united in purpose and spirit. And finally, the cosmic shift, Jobin said, his eyes twinkling like distant stars. We need to look beyond our planet, to explore the cosmos, to search for extraterrestrial life. Because maybe, just maybe, the answers we seek are out there. As he left the office, Jobin felt a sense of peace wash over him. The good timeline was within reach, a future that was not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. And for the first time in a long time, he knew that it was not just possible, but inevitable. He pulled over to the side of the road, staring at the horizon where the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of apocalyptic red. Climate change, the great equalizer, he muttered to himself, taking a drag from his cigarette. We've got a decade, maybe less, to turn this ship around. Jobin revved the engine and sped off, his thoughts shifting to the social fabric that was tearing at the seams. Inequality, injustice, the festering wounds of a society divided, he thought, gripping the wheel tighter. As he drove through a city lit by neon lights and digital billboards, Jobin pondered the role of technology in shaping the future. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, the double-edged swords of progress, he mused, navigating through the maze of autonomous vehicles. The signs were there in the algorithms that controlled our lives, in the gene therapies that promised immortality, in the virtual realities that blurred the lines between man and machine. It was the technological singularity, a point of no return that could either save us or doom us. It's time to wake up, to see the world for what it is, to take action before it's too late. The signs were there in the underground movements that spread like wildfire. So, here's the plan, Jobin said, unveiling a detailed roadmap on a holographic screen. We tackle the climate reckoning, we fuel the social revolution, we navigate the technological singularity, that's how we enter the good timeline, that's how we save the world. A roadmap to redemption. It's a journey that will test the limits of human ingenuity and resilience, but it's a journey that must be taken, for the sake of the planet and future generations. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in a dimly lit room, the walls covered in scribbled equations, news clippings, and maps of the world's hotspots. His eyes were bloodshot, not from the whiskey that sat half empty on his desk, but from the weight of the world that rested on his shoulders. The Climate Initiative. He picked up a piece of paper, a blueprint for a global climate initiative that aimed to reverse the damage done. Carbon capture, renewable energy, reforestation, he read aloud, his voice tinged with a mix of hope and skepticism. Is this enough? Can we really undo what's been done? The signs were there in the melting ice caps, in the dying coral reefs, in the extreme weather events that defied all predictions. But there were also signs of change, of a world waking up to the reality of its own mortality. Universal basic income, healthcare for all, educational reform, he mumbled, scrolling through the document. The signs were there in the rise of authoritarian regimes, in the collapse of social safety nets, in the erosion of civil liberties. But there were also signs of resistance, of communities coming together to reclaim their rights and their dignity. He glanced at his smartphone, a device that epitomized the technological dilemma facing humanity. Surveillance capitalism, data privacy, ethical AI, he pondered, contemplating the moral implications of a connected world. The signs were there in the monopolies that controlled the digital landscape, in the algorithms that manipulated public opinion, in the ethical quandaries that challenged our very humanity. But there were also signs of innovation, of technologies that empowered rather than enslaved. The signs were there in the grassroots movements that defied conventional wisdom, in the cultural shifts that redefined the narrative, in the collective consciousness that transcended individual ego. It was a call to action that could not be ignored. The final countdown. As we approach the tipping point, the point of no return, we have a choice, Jobin said, looking into the camera as he recorded his message for the world. We can either succumb to the darkness, or we can be the light that guides us through the storm. This is our moment, our final countdown, and we must seize it with both hands. Jobin grapples with the complexities and contradictions of a world on the edge, but he also offers a vision of a brighter future, a future that is not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. Clock is ticking, but there's still time to change the course of history, to enter the good timeline, and to leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. Sea level rise, desertification, mass extinction, he muttered, scribbling notes on a cocktail napkin. The signs were clear, but so were the solutions. We need a global carbon tax, a ban on single-use plastics, a moratorium on deforestation, he thought. Jobin's mind shifted to the social upheavals that had swept the globe. Income inequality, systemic racism, gender discrimination, he listed, each issue a symptom of a deeper malaise. We need a living wage, universal health care, equal rights for all, he concluded, his pen racing across the page. He looked at his smartphone, a device that had become both a tool and a tyrant. Big tech, big data, big brother, he mused, contemplating the Orwellian implications of a digital dystopia. We need data sovereignty, ethical algorithms, digital democracy, he resolved, his vision crystallizing. He opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he poured his soul into the document. We, the people of the earth, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain a way to reach a calm resolution for the planet Earth. He knew that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but he also knew that the future was not set in stone, that destiny was not a matter of chance but a matter of choice. It's a pragmatic strategy, and it's the only way to avert catastrophe and achieve prosperity. The time for talk is over, the time for action is now, and the time for change is upon us. The clock is ticking, but there's still time to rewrite the script, to flip the script, and to script a new narrative for the planet and its people. The choice is ours, and the power is in our hands. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, a glass of bourbon in front of him. The news on the TV was a cacophony of disasters, wildfires, political unrest, economic collapse. But Jobin wasn't there for the news, he was there for clarity. Climate change isn't just about the planet, it's about the soul of humanity, Jobin thought. He envisioned community gardens in urban wastelands, solar panels on every rooftop, and electric cars humming quietly on the roads. We need to reforest the Amazon, clean the oceans, and for God's sake, stop burning fossil fuels, he muttered to himself. Jobin's thoughts shifted to the social fabric tearing at the seams. We're a society addicted to outrage, but what we need is dialogue, he pondered. We need to listen, really listen, to the cries for justice, equality, and dignity. He envisioned a world where social media platforms were designed to foster understanding rather than division, where algorithms served the public good rather than corporate greed. He looked at his phone, now more of a leash than a tool. We need to reclaim our data, our privacy, and our lives from the tech overlords, he thought. He saw a future where technology was a means to liberate rather than enslave, where AI was used to solve complex problems like poverty and disease rather than to sell ads or sow discord. The world's a mess, but it's our mess to clean, he thought. He opened his laptop and started typing. That included not just policies but also practices for individual and collective well-being. Mindfulness, empathy, resilience, these are the tools we need to navigate the chaos, he wrote. As he closed his laptop, Jobin felt a sense of calm wash over him. We can't control the world, but we can control how we respond to it, he realized. He saw a future where people practiced mindfulness to stay grounded, where communities came together in times of crisis, and where leaders chose compassion over cruelty. Life isn't just about changing the world, it's about changing ourselves. And that, Jobin believes, is the first step toward a future that is not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. Last call for humanity, Jobin thought, sipping his bourbon. We've got about a decade to turn this ship around, or we're all going down with it. He envisioned a world where the last coal plant had been shut down, where the last gas guzzler had been traded in for a bike, and where the last skeptic had finally accepted the undeniable truth of climate change. It's not just about saving the planet, it's about saving ourselves, he mused. Jobin's mind wandered to the social unrest that had become the background noise of modern life. We're so focused on what divides us that we've forgotten what unites us, he thought. He saw a future where people had stopped shouting and started listening, where they had stopped blaming and started understanding. We need to replace the politics of fear with the politics of hope, he wrote in his ever-present notebook. Jobin looked at his smartphone, a device that promised to connect but often isolated, to inform but often misled. We need to use technology to amplify the best of humanity, not the worst, he thought. He envisioned a world where algorithms served the collective good, where data was a resource to be shared, not hoarded. Jobin felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he also felt an unshakable sense of calm. We can't control the chaos around us, but we can control the chaos within us, he realized. He saw a future where mindfulness was taught in schools, where meditation was prescribed by doctors, and where inner peace was considered a human right. As Jobin closed his notebook, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. We have the tools to build a better world, but do we have the will, he wondered. He knew that the road ahead was long and uncertain, but he also knew that the first step was the hardest. And so, with a sense of cautious optimism, Jobin took that first step, not knowing where it would lead but knowing that it was the only way forward. He understands that the challenges we face are daunting, but he also believes that the solutions are within reach. Jobin carries with him not just the weight of the world, but also the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Jobin carries with him not just the weight of the world, but also the hope of a brighter tomorrow. By 2051, we'll either be living in harmony with the planet or we'll be its most tragic victims, Jobin thought. He envisioned solar farms stretching across deserts, wind turbines spinning above the oceans, and cities powered by the very waste they produced. We have the technology, we just need the will, he muttered, scribbling down his thoughts. Jobin saw a future where social justice wasn't just a buzzword but a lived reality. He saw universal health care, education for all, and a justice system that was actually just. We need to stop treating symptoms and start addressing root causes, he wrote. And for God's sake, let's stop hating each other for superficial reasons. Technology will be our savior or our downfall, the choice is ours, Jobin pondered. He saw AI being used to solve complex social issues, not just to sell more stuff. He saw the internet as a tool for global education, not a playground for trolls. We need ethical algorithms, damn it, he exclaimed, startling a passerby. Jobin knew that external change began with internal transformation. We need a revolution of consciousness, he thought. He envisioned a world where emotional intelligence was as valued as IQ, where people were taught to navigate their inner worlds as skillfully as they navigated the external one. Mindfulness, meditation, introspection, these are the tools of the new age, he wrote. Jobin sealed the time capsule and buried it in the ground, marking the spot with a simple stone. See you in 2051, he whispered, as if the earth itself could hear him. He knew that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but he also knew that it was paved with opportunities. We have the power to shape our own destiny, let's not squander it, he thought, walking away with a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. This is either the fuel of the apocalypse or the elixir of the enlightened. Depends on the day. 2051, huh? Jobin mumbled to the bartender, who looked like he'd seen it all but was still surprised by human stupidity. If we don't get our shit together, we'll be drinking recycled piss while the world burns. Jobin envisioned solar farms not just as energy sources but as art installations, a testament to human ingenuity. We could make this a renaissance, not a requiem, he thought. But he knew it would take more than thoughts and prayers, it would take action. Universal health care, education, justice. Sounds like a utopian dream, but it's just common sense, Jobin said, scribbling on a napkin. We've got the resources, we just hoard them like dragons hoarding gold. He imagined a world where people were valued for their humanity, not their productivity or their bank accounts. We need to redefine success, man. It's not about climbing the ladder, it's about making sure the ladder is leaning against the right wall. Jobin looked at his smartphone. We've got the world in our hands, but we're too busy scrolling through bullshit to notice. He saw the potential for technology to either liberate or enslave. AI could solve climate change, or it could turn us into batteries for the Matrix. The code we write today will dictate the laws of tomorrow. Jobin knew that the world outside reflected the chaos within. We're all walking around like ticking time bombs, waiting to explode. We need to defuse ourselves before we destroy everything else. He thought about mindfulness, about the power of now. We need to teach people to navigate the storms in their minds, not just the storms in the world. Inner peace leads to outer peace. The world's a mess, but it's our mess. And if we're the problem, then we're also the solution. He walked into the night, carrying with him a vision of a future that was not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. It was a heavy burden, but one he was willing to bear. After all, the weight of the world is easier to carry when you're not carrying it alone. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin found himself in a makeshift community center, a place where people gathered to share ideas, resources, and hope. The walls were adorned with murals of a better world, a stark contrast to the grim reality outside. Listen, we've got about 30 years to turn this ship around. And that's being optimistic, he began. We need to invest in renewable energy. He envisioned cities with vertical farms, public transport powered by clean energy, and a ban on single-use plastics. We've got the technology, we just need the will. Jobin shifted his focus. We need a new social contract. One that says healthcare and education are rights, not privileges. One that values people over profit. He spoke of a universal basic income, not just as a safety net but as a trampoline, propelling people to new heights. Give people the freedom to fail, and you'll be amazed at how often they succeed. Technology should be our servant, not our master, Jobin continued. We need to use AI and big data to solve the big problems: climate change, poverty, disease. But we also need to protect our privacy, our freedom. He warned against the rise of surveillance capitalism and the erosion of civil liberties. We're sleepwalking into a dystopia. It's time to wake up. We're all carrying around a lot of baggage: fear, anger, guilt. We need to let that shit go. He spoke of mindfulness, of the power of compassion. If we can heal ourselves, we can heal the world. It's all connected. As we move towards 2051, remember this, Jobin concluded, we carry with us the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. The crowd erupted into applause, not just for Jobin, but for the vision he articulated, a vision they all shared. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. And in that moment, Jobin knew that the journey to 2051 was a journey worth taking, a journey that they would take together. In this chapter, Jobin lays out a blueprint for the future, a roadmap to 2051. It's a future fraught with challenges but also ripe with opportunities. And as he stands there, basking in the applause, he knows that the real work is just beginning. But it's work that he and we are capable of doing, work that must be done if we are to navigate through the intense moments that occur in everyone's lives and create a world that is peaceful, just, and sustainable. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat alone in his cramped apartment, a stark contrast to the community center where he had spoken just days before. The applause had faded, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. He lit a cigarette and took a long drag, contemplating the road ahead. The immediate challenges. All right, talk is cheap, he muttered to himself, stubbing out the cigarette. Time to put my money where my mouth is. He pulled out his laptop and began drafting proposals for local government initiatives. Solar panel installations, community gardens, mental health programs, small steps, but steps nonetheless. Jobin knew he couldn't do it alone. He started reaching out to like-minded individuals, forming a network of activists, scientists, and policymakers. We're building a web here, and every strand counts, he thought. He also initiated online campaigns to raise awareness and funds. The internet is a double-edged sword, he mused. Might as well use it to cut through the bullshit. Despite the momentum, Jobin felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He turned to meditation, seeking solace in the stillness of his mind. If I'm going to carry this weight, I need a strong foundation, he realized. Jobin understood that the problems he was tackling were not confined to his community or even his country. They were global issues that required global solutions. He began collaborating with international organizations, contributing his ideas and learning from others. The world's a mess, but it's our mess, he thought. And if we don't clean it up, who will? He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. He looked at the clock. It was late, but he felt invigorated. The night's always darkest before the dawn, he thought, smiling to himself. And I think I see a glimmer of light on the horizon. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place where the beer is cheap and the conversations are expensive. He was meeting with Sarah, an environmental scientist who had recently published a paper on the irreversible damage to the Arctic ice sheet. Jobin, "We're at a tipping point," Sarah said, her eyes filled with a mix of urgency and despair. "If we don't act now, we're looking at a future where the damage is irreversible." The personal toll. Jobin felt overwhelmed. The weight of the world seemed heavier than ever. But then he remembered his meditation, his inner sanctuary. "I can't let this break me," he thought. "I need to be strong for the world." Jobin started to think bigger. He reached out to influential figures in various fields, from technology to politics, forming a global coalition aimed at systemic change. "If we're going to tip the scales, we need all hands on deck," he mused. The light at the end. As he left the bar, Jobin felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, the challenges were monumental, but so were the opportunities. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin found himself in a conference room filled with world leaders, scientists, and activists. The air was thick with tension, but also with the possibility of change. This was the Global Summit on Climate and Social Justice, and Jobin had been invited to speak. The opening remarks. As he took the podium, Jobin felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he also felt the light of hope, a glimmer that had been kindled in that dimly lit bar with Sarah and had grown brighter with each step he took. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we stand at the precipice of history. The choices we make today will determine the fate of our planet and the generations to come. The Earth is dying, and we are the culprits. But we are also the cure. We have the technology, the resources, and the collective will to turn things around. What we lack is the courage to confront the systemic issues that perpetuate our crisis. We need to decarbonize our economies, invest in renewable energy, and protect our natural habitats," Jobin continued. "But we also need to address the social inequalities that make sustainability a privilege rather than a right." Jobin paused, looking at the faces in the room. "I know it's hard. I've had my moments of despair. But I've also seen the power of collective action, of communities coming together to make a difference. As we move forward," Jobin concluded, "let us remember that we carry with us not just the weight of the world, but also the light of hope. Together, we can illuminate the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious." As Jobin stepped down from the podium, the room erupted in applause. But this was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, in the policies to be drafted, the initiatives to be launched, and the lives to be changed. Not because the problems had been solved overnight, but because people were finally talking, finally acknowledging the gravity of the situation. The first signs. His phone buzzed. It was a news alert: global leaders pledge to cut emissions by 50% by 2030. It was a start, a small but significant step in the right direction. Jobin knew that pledges were just words, but words had power. They were the first signs of a collective will to change. The personal struggles. Jobin thought about his own life, the ups and downs, the moments of despair and the glimmers of hope. He realized that the world was a reflection of the human condition, a complex tapestry of emotions, actions, and consequences. And just like individuals have to navigate through intense moments, so does humanity as a whole. The calm before the storm. We need to find our center, our core of stability, Jobin mused. In a world that's increasingly unstable, we need to cultivate inner peace. Only then can we hope to create a world that is peaceful and just. The path to harmony. Jobin picked up his pen and began to jot down ideas. Community gardens, mental health programs, educational reforms, decentralized energy grids, reforestation projects. The list went on. These were not just environmental solutions but social ones, aimed at creating a society that was not just sustainable but also just and harmonious. The light of hope. As Jobin closed his notebook, he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity he had never felt before. He knew the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but he also knew that he was not alone. He was part of a larger movement, a global awakening. In this chapter, Jobin reflects on the ripple effect of collective action. He understands that the path to a better future is not a straight line but a winding road filled with obstacles and opportunities. And as he navigates through this complex landscape, he carries with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. They were discussing the latest climate models, the rise of authoritarianism, and the collapse of ecosystems. The air was thick with a mix of dread and determination. Science was clear, the signs unmistakable. The planet was in crisis, and humanity was at a crossroads. The quiet revolution. But we can change the course, Jobin said, his voice steady. We can enter the good timeline. We can save the world, not by grand gestures, but by a million small acts of kindness, courage, and ingenuity. The plan. He laid out his blueprint for a sustainable, just, and harmonious future. It was a plan that involved everyone, from the individual to the global community. It was a plan that could be implemented immediately, without waiting for bureaucratic approvals or political will. The light of hope. As we navigate through the intense moments that occur in everyone's lives, we must remember that we carry with us not just the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, Jobin said, locking eyes with each person in the room. And that light can illuminate the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. The first step. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. It was a small gathering. Jobin understands that the world is at a critical juncture. But he also knows that the power to change lies within each of us. And as he shares his vision for a better future, he carries with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. He thought about the climate models, the social unrest, the political turmoil. The world was a powder keg, and it felt like everyone was holding a match. Jobin knew that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but he also knew that he had a role to play in shaping the future. And so, he made a vow to himself, to be a catalyst for positive change, to be a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the edge. As we navigate through the intense moments that occur in everyone's lives, we must remember that we carry with us not just the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, he thought, echoing his own words from the community center. And that light can illuminate the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. A climate scientist took the floor, her voice tinged with urgency. We're at a tipping point, she said. If we don't act now, the consequences will be irreversible. Jobin listened intently, his mind racing. The data was damning, but it was also a roadmap, a guide to the most likely outcomes if humanity continued on its current path. And it wasn't pretty. We need a multi-pronged approach, said a community organizer, breaking the heavy silence. Policy change, grassroots movements, technological innovation, and most importantly, education. Jobin nodded. It was a tall order, but it was also the only way forward. And so, a plan was hatched, a blueprint for a sustainable, just, and harmonious future. As the meeting came to a close, Jobin felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the challenges ahead were monumental, but he also knew that he had a role to play, a contribution to make. He looked around the room, at the faces filled with determination and resolve. We carry with us the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, he thought. And that light can guide us through the darkest of times, illuminating the path to a future that is not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. As he left the meeting, Jobin felt a sense of urgency, but also a sense of possibility. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles and setbacks, but he also knew that every step taken was a step closer to a better future. The ripple effect. Jobin understood that his actions, no matter how small, had the power to create ripples, to influence others, to inspire change. And it was this understanding that filled him with hope, hope for a world that was increasingly unstable, yet teetering on the brink of transformation. Jobin sat in his makeshift home office, surrounded by a labyrinth of screens displaying real-time data on climate change, social movements, and technological advancements. His eyes darted from one screen to another, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The world was at a tipping point, and the clock was ticking. The data speaks. One screen caught his attention: a report on the latest climate models predicting sea level rise, extreme weather events, and mass extinctions if immediate action wasn't taken. Jobin felt a chill run down his spine. This was the future, not in some distant time, but within his lifetime. It was a future he refused to accept. The plan. With a sense of urgency, Jobin began to draft a comprehensive plan to combat climate change. It involved transitioning to renewable energy, reforestation, and implementing sustainable agriculture practices. But he knew that the plan needed more than just technical solutions, it needed a cultural shift, a change in mindset. The community. Jobin decided to take his plan to the community. He organized town hall meetings, workshops, and educational programs. Slowly but surely, people began to listen, to understand, and to act. The community started to adopt sustainable practices, reducing their carbon footprint and living more harmoniously with nature. The global impact. News of Jobin's efforts began to spread, inspiring similar movements around the world. Governments started to take notice, implementing policies that promoted sustainability and social justice. It was as if the world had reached a turning point, a moment of collective awakening. The light of hope. As Jobin looked back on his journey, he realized that he had become a beacon of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just and harmonious. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, and it was this light that had ignited a global movement for change. The regeneration. Jobin understood that the path to regeneration was not just about combating climate change, but also about creating a society that was equitable and just. And so, he continued his efforts, focusing on social justice initiatives, mental health programs, and community-building activities, all aimed at creating a world where every individual could thrive without experiencing unnecessary negative experiences. The reality check. He looked at his phone, scrolling through a barrage of social media posts, each one a cocktail of ignorance, denial, and apathy. What's the point, he thought, taking another swig of bourbon. But then, something caught his eye: a young girl holding a sign that read, "There is no planet B." It was a simple message, but it hit him like a freight train. The movement. Jobin didn't just want to change light bulbs, he wanted to change minds. He started organizing, mobilizing, and educating. He used his skills in data analysis to show people the hard facts, but he also told them stories that made them feel, that made them care, that made them act. The global shift. His efforts started to gain traction. Protests turned into policies, hashtags turned into movements, and slowly but surely, the world began to change. Renewable energy became the norm, social justice was no longer just a buzzword, and people started to see the planet as a home, not just a resource. Jobin knew he was just one man, but he also knew that one man could be a catalyst for change. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope. And it was this light that started to illuminate a path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. The path forward. As he looked toward the horizon, Jobin realized that the journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, battles to fight, and hearts to win. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. He had seen the signs, understood their meaning, and had taken steps to move the timeline in a positive direction. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in his makeshift office, a room filled with scribbled notes, graphs, and a wall-sized world map marked with pins and strings. His eyes were bloodshot, not from the bourbon this time, but from the sleepless nights spent in research and planning. He was on a mission, and time was running out. The catalyst. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a climate scientist he'd been corresponding with. Latest models are worse than we thought. We have less time than we imagined. Jobin sighed. The weight of the world felt heavier, but it also fueled his resolve. The plan. He opened his laptop and began typing. He was crafting a blueprint, a step-by-step guide to reversing the damage, to healing the planet and society. It was ambitious, audacious even, but it was feasible. It had to be. He included everything from renewable energy projects to social justice initiatives, from mental health programs to educational reforms. The network. Jobin knew he couldn't do it alone. He started reaching out to experts in various fields, from renewable energy to social justice. He formed a network of like-minded individuals, each contributing their expertise to the blueprint. They were the architects of the future, and the blueprint was their master plan. The implementation. The blueprint was ready, and it was time to put it into action. Jobin and his network started small, implementing pilot projects in local communities. They focused on sustainability, but also on education, mental health, and social justice. The results were promising. The projects were not just sustainable but also harmonious and just. The domino effect. Word spread, and other communities started adopting the blueprint. It was a domino effect, each success leading to another, each failure a lesson learned. Governments started to take notice, and policies began to change. The world was waking up, and Jobin's blueprint was the alarm clock. The light of hope. As Jobin looked at the world map on his wall, he felt a sense of accomplishment but also a sense of urgency. The light of hope was brighter, but the path was still long and fraught with challenges. Yet, for the first time, the end seemed achievable. Jobin carried with him not just the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. He was scrolling through his phone, reading news headlines that seemed to oscillate between hopeful and catastrophic. The reality check. Global CO2 levels drop for the first time in decades, one headline read. Mass protests erupt over income inequality, said another. Jobin took a sip of his whiskey, feeling the burn as it went down. The world was a paradox, a place of immense beauty and terrible ugliness, often existing side by side. The tipping point. He realized that humanity was at a tipping point. The blueprint he and his network had created was gaining traction, but the forces of inertia and resistance were formidable. The next decade would be crucial. It would determine whether the world tipped towards sustainability and justice or spiraled into chaos and destruction. The personal struggles. Jobin's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his daughter. Dad, when are you coming home? I miss you. He felt a pang of guilt. In his quest to save the world, he had sometimes neglected the people who meant the most to him. Balancing the personal and the global was a struggle, one that he knew he had to get right. The collective consciousness. Jobin believed that the key to tipping the scales was to elevate the collective consciousness. People needed to realize that their actions had consequences, that their choices mattered. And it wasn't just about big, systemic changes, it was also about the small, everyday decisions. Choosing kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, love over hate. The grassroots movement. He decided to focus on grassroots movements, empowering local communities to take charge of their own destinies. He started organizing workshops, town halls, and community projects, each one a small but significant step towards a better future. The light at the end of the tunnel. As he left the bar, Jobin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges were immense, but so were the opportunities. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. The butterfly effect. He was contemplating the concept of the butterfly effect, the idea that small actions can have large, unpredictable consequences. It was a notion that both fascinated and terrified him. The world was a complex system, and even the best laid plans could go awry. The data speaks. His computer pinged, signaling the arrival of new data. Renewable energy was on the rise, but so were global temperatures. The gap between the rich and the poor was narrowing in some places, widening in others. It was a mixed bag, a mosaic of progress and setbacks. The emotional toll. Jobin felt the weight of it all, the enormity of the task at hand. He was just one man, and the problems he was trying to solve were global in scale. But then he remembered a quote he had read somewhere: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." The power of community. Inspired, Jobin decided to double down on community engagement. He started collaborating with local leaders, activists, and educators, creating a network of change makers. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at reducing waste, promoting social justice, and fostering community resilience. The personal touch. But Jobin also knew that change had to start at the individual level. He began hosting mindfulness workshops, teaching people how to manage stress and cultivate empathy. He believed that a more mindful populace would make more thoughtful decisions, both in their personal lives and in the voting booth. As he closed his laptop and stepped outside, Jobin felt a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but he was not alone. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place where Bukowski might have penned a poem or two. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke, even though smoking had been banned for years. He was staring at a glass of bourbon, contemplating the years that lay ahead. The tipping point. The year was 2023, and the world was at a tipping point. The next decade would be crucial. Climate models had become increasingly accurate, and they all pointed to the same grim reality: if significant changes weren't made by 2030, the planet would reach a point of no return. The good timeline. Jobin had always been fascinated by the concept of timelines, the idea that our choices could create branching paths leading to different futures. He wondered what it would take to steer humanity onto a good timeline, one characterized by sustainability, justice, and peace. The signs. He had spent years studying the signs, the subtle indicators that could tell us where we were headed. Rising sea levels, increasing income inequality, political instability — these were all symptoms of a deeper malaise. But there were also signs of hope: technological innovations, grassroots movements, a growing awareness of the interconnectedness of all life. The plan. Jobin knew that the key to entering the good timeline was collective action. It wasn't enough for individuals to reduce their carbon footprint or for corporations to adopt sustainable practices. What was needed was a systemic change, a complete overhaul of the way society functioned. The movement. Inspired, Jobin decided to start a movement. He called it the Decade of Decision, a global initiative aimed at making the 2020s the turning point in human history. The movement would focus on three main areas: climate action, social justice, and mental well-being. The legacy. As he left the bar, Jobin felt a strange mix of dread and excitement. The challenges were immense, but so were the opportunities. He carried with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin found himself in a makeshift office, a cramped room filled with second-hand furniture and outdated computers. It was the headquarters of the Decade of Decision, and it was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were hunched over keyboards, drafting press releases and coordinating protests. Others were on the phone, reaching out to potential donors and allies. The reality check. Jobin knew that the road ahead was fraught with obstacles. The fossil fuel industry was more powerful than ever, and populist leaders around the world were stoking the flames of division. But he also knew that the tide was beginning to turn. The youth were mobilized, and public opinion was shifting. The question was, would it be enough? The strategy. The movement had identified several key initiatives that could have a significant impact in a short period. First on the list was a push for renewable energy. Solar and wind technologies had advanced to the point where they were not only viable but also cost-effective. The challenge was to overcome the political and economic barriers that were preventing widespread adoption. The mental landscape. Jobin was aware that the external world was a reflection of the internal world. To create a peaceful and just society, individuals needed to cultivate peace and justice within themselves. The movement, therefore, included a mental well-being component, offering resources and support for people dealing with stress, anxiety, and other emotional challenges. The light of hope. As he looked around the room, Jobin felt a surge of hope. These were ordinary people, but they were capable of extraordinary things. Each volunteer carried with them the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. The countdown. The clock on the wall read 11:59 p.m. It was almost midnight, both literally and metaphorically. The next decade would determine the fate of the planet, and the countdown had begun. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, a place where the wood was old and the memories were older. He sipped on a glass of bourbon, the kind that burns your throat but cleanses your soul. The news on the TV was grim wildfires, floods, and the ever-looming threat of social collapse. But Jobin wasn't there to drown his sorrows, he was there to think, to plan, to figure out the next move. The signs. He'd been reading up on climate models, social theories, and the psychology of change. The signs were there, clear as day for those who cared to look. The planet was at a tipping point, a delicate balance between regeneration and ruin. And humanity? Well, it was standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the void. The good timeline. Jobin knew that to shift the timeline towards something positive, something sustainable, he had to act and act fast. He sketched out a plan on a napkin. It involved leveraging social media to create a viral campaign that would make sustainability cool. He wanted to tap into the collective consciousness and steer it towards empathy, cooperation, and long-term thinking. The weight and the light. He felt the weight, oh yes, the unbearable weight of the world on his shoulders. But he also felt the light of hope, of possibility, of a future where children could breathe clean air and walk through green forests. He knew he was just one man, but sometimes that's all it takes, one man, one moment, one decision that could change the course of history. He discussed strategies for pushing for policy changes, for grassroots mobilization, and for corporate accountability. They talked about the importance of mental health, of building resilience in communities, and of creating spaces for dialogue and understanding. The first step. As the meeting came to an end, Jobin stood up and looked at each person in the room. "We're the first step," he said, "the first step in a journey of 1,000 miles. And yes, the road ahead is long and fraught with challenges. But remember this, we're not walking alone. Every step we take is a step towards a future that is not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful." The world was still in an increasingly unstable state, and it would take more than financial reforms to calm it down. It would take a cultural shift, a change in values and beliefs, a collective awakening to the interconnectedness of all life. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat on a park bench, the autumn leaves crunching beneath his feet. The air was crisp, a reminder that winter was coming. But for the first time in years, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the warmth of hope, the realization that change was possible, that the future could be different. The global movement. The divestment campaign had triggered a ripple effect that went beyond Wall Street. Governments were starting to take action, implementing policies that prioritized sustainability and social justice. Grassroots movements were gaining momentum, mobilizing people from all walks of life. And corporations were beginning to understand that their long-term success depended on their ability to adapt to a changing world. The new narrative. Jobin knew that stories had the power to shape reality, and so he started working on a new narrative, one that celebrated diversity, promoted equality, and championed ecological stewardship. He collaborated with artists, writers, and filmmakers, leveraging the power of storytelling to inspire a cultural transformation. The emotional resilience. But even as the world started to change, Jobin was aware that the journey ahead was fraught with challenges. Climate change was accelerating, social inequalities were deepening, and geopolitical tensions were rising. To navigate through these intense moments, he focused on building emotional resilience, cultivating a mindset that allowed him to stay centered in the face of adversity. The inner peace. Jobin also realized that peace was not just a political or social construct, but a state of mind. And so, he started practicing mindfulness, meditation, and other techniques that helped him find inner peace. This inner tranquility became his anchor, a source of strength that enabled him to weather the storms of life. The collective awakening. As he sat on the park bench, watching the leaves fall and the children play, Jobin felt a sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself, a collective awakening that was redefining what it meant to be human. And he was grateful for the small victories, the incremental changes that were adding up to something transformative. The path forward. Jobin knew that the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful, was still long and uncertain. But as he looked around, he saw signs of progress, glimmers of hope that illuminated the path forward. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, he stood up, took a deep breath, and walked back into the world, ready to take the next step on this incredible journey. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin found himself in a bustling city square, surrounded by a sea of faces. The crowd had gathered for a climate rally, and the energy was palpable. As he looked around, he saw people from all walks of life: students, activists, scientists, and even politicians. It was a microcosm of humanity, united by a common cause. The political landscape. The political landscape had shifted dramatically over the past few years. Climate change was no longer a partisan issue, it was a human issue. Governments around the world were starting to collaborate, setting aside their differences to tackle the existential threat that loomed over humanity. New policies were being enacted, from carbon pricing to renewable energy mandates, signaling a turning point in the fight against climate change. The technological revolution. Technological advancements were also playing a crucial role. Renewable energy was becoming cheaper and more efficient, making it easier for countries to transition away from fossil fuels. Innovations in agriculture, transportation, and waste management were helping to reduce the environmental impact of human activities. The social fabric. But Jobin knew that technology alone was not enough. The social fabric needed to change as well. People needed to move away from a culture of consumerism and towards a culture of conservation. And so, he started working on community-based initiatives that promoted sustainable living, from urban farming to zero-waste programs. The emotional intelligence. As the world became increasingly volatile, emotional intelligence was becoming a critical skill. Jobin focused on fostering empathy and compassion, both within himself and within his community. He realized that these qualities were essential for navigating the complex challenges that lay ahead. The spiritual connection. Jobin also explored the spiritual dimensions of sustainability. He delved into ancient wisdom traditions, seeking to understand how they could inform modern approaches to ecological stewardship. This spiritual connection enriched his perspective, adding depth and nuance to his understanding of the issues at hand. The path of hope. As he stood in the city square, listening to the impassioned speeches and the heartfelt chants, Jobin felt a sense of hope. It was a fragile hope, tempered by the harsh realities of a world in crisis. But it was also a resilient hope, fueled by the collective will of a species fighting for its survival. As he looked out the window, he saw a group of young people planting trees in a nearby park. It was a simple act, but one that symbolized the broader changes taking place in society. The power of individual actions. Jobin had always believed in the power of individual actions to create collective change. The tree planting initiative was just one example. Across the globe, people were taking matters into their own hands, from cleaning up beaches to installing solar panels on their rooftops. These actions were creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to join the movement for a sustainable future. The role of education. Education was another critical factor. Schools were starting to integrate sustainability into their curricula, teaching students about the importance of environmental stewardship from a young age. Jobin himself had started giving guest lectures at local universities, sharing his insights on the interconnectedness of social, economic, and environmental issues. The media landscape. The media landscape was also evolving. Gone were the days when climate change was a fringe topic, relegated to the back pages of newspapers. Now, it was front-page news, covered extensively by journalists who understood the gravity of the situation. Social media platforms were amplifying these messages, reaching audiences that had previously been disengaged from environmental issues. The financial shift. On the financial front, there was a growing trend towards sustainable investing. Companies that prioritized environmental and social responsibility were attracting more capital, forcing other businesses to re-evaluate their practices. Jobin had even started his own impact investment fund, channeling resources into projects that aligned with his vision for a sustainable future. The emotional resilience. As the world grappled with the emotional toll of climate change from natural disasters to social upheaval, Jobin recognized the importance of emotional resilience. He began organizing community workshops on mindfulness and stress management, providing people with the tools they needed to cope with the challenges of a rapidly changing world. The path forward. As he finished his coffee and prepared to leave the cafe, Jobin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path to a sustainable future was fraught with obstacles, but it was also paved with opportunities. Each action, no matter how small, was a step in the right direction, a ripple in the vast ocean of change. How could we shift towards the most positive, harmonious, and peaceful timeline? The quantum possibilities. Quantum theory suggested that every decision, every action, created a new branch in the timeline of reality. Jobin pondered this as he looked at the various models predicting climate change, social unrest, and technological advancements. Each model was a potential timeline, and the choices humanity made would determine which one would manifest. The power of collective consciousness. Jobin had always been fascinated by the concept of collective consciousness, the idea that when enough people focus their minds on a specific outcome, it becomes more likely to occur. He started a social media campaign, #ShiftTheTimeline, encouraging people to visualize a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. The campaign went viral, reaching millions of people worldwide. The role of technology. Technology had a significant role to play in this timeline shift. Innovations in renewable energy, waste management, and sustainable agriculture were accelerating, providing humanity with the tools needed to mitigate environmental degradation. Jobin collaborated with tech companies to develop apps that could track an individual's carbon footprint, encouraging more sustainable behavior. The political will. Political will was another crucial factor. For years, bureaucracy and short-term thinking had hindered progress. But as the #Shift the Timeline movement gained traction, politicians could no longer ignore the voice of the people. Policies started to change, with governments investing in green infrastructure and passing laws to protect natural habitats. The spiritual awakening. But perhaps the most profound shift was spiritual. People were beginning to understand that they were not separate from the earth, but a part of it. This spiritual awakening led to a greater sense of responsibility and care for the planet and each other. Jobin himself started practicing meditation, finding that it helped him connect with his inner wisdom and intuition. The moment of realization. As he sat back in his chair, Jobin realized that the timeline was already shifting. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was happening. Every tree planted, every law passed, every mind awakened was steering humanity towards a more positive future. And so, as he closed his laptop and stepped outside to join a community cleanup event, Jobin felt a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that the path ahead was uncertain, but also full of potential. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly optimistic about the future, a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, the salty breeze mingling with his thoughts. He had come here to reflect, to understand the deeper currents that were shaping the world. The #Shift the Timeline movement had gained momentum, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The harmonic convergence. As he looked out at the horizon, he thought about the concept of a harmonic convergence, a point in time when multiple timelines could intersect, allowing for a significant shift in collective consciousness. The idea was not new, it had roots in various spiritual traditions and even scientific theories. But never before had it felt so urgent, so necessary. The role of education. Jobin believed that education was a cornerstone in shifting towards a more positive timeline. He started working with educational institutions to incorporate sustainability, ethics, and emotional intelligence into their curricula. The aim was to raise a generation that was not only knowledgeable but also compassionate and aware. The importance of mental health. Mental health had often been overlooked in discussions about the future, but Jobin knew it was crucial. A society plagued by stress, anxiety, and depression could never truly progress. He advocated for mental health programs that focused on mindfulness, emotional regulation, and community support. The media revolution. The media had a significant role to play in shaping public perception. Jobin collaborated with journalists and influencers to shift the narrative from one of fear and division to one of hope and unity. Slowly, the headlines began to change, focusing on solutions rather than problems, on what united us rather than what divided us. The economic paradigm shift. Economically, the world was at a crossroads. The old systems, built on exploitation and inequality, were crumbling. Jobin was part of a think tank that was exploring alternative economic models based on sustainability and equitable distribution of resources. Concepts like universal basic income and circular economy were no longer fringe ideas but were being seriously considered by policymakers. The final push. As the harmonic convergence approached, a sense of anticipation filled the air. People from all walks of life were coming together, united by a common vision for the future. Massive global meditations were organized, aimed at focusing collective intention on the most positive, harmonious, and peaceful timeline. The convergence. And then it happened. It was subtle, almost like the quiet before a storm, but Jobin felt it, a shift in the energy of the planet. Reports started coming in from around the world, peace treaties were being signed, environmental laws were being passed, communities were coming together in unprecedented ways. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in his makeshift office, a room filled with books, plants, and a wall-sized screen displaying real-time data on various global metrics: carbon emissions, poverty rates, mental health statistics. The harmonic convergence had passed, but the work was far from over. The world was still in a state of flux, teetering between the old ways and the new paradigm. The power of individual actions. Jobin had always believed in the power of individual actions to bring about collective change. He launched a global campaign encouraging people to take small, daily actions that aligned with the new paradigm, whether it was reducing waste, supporting local businesses, or simply taking the time to connect with a neighbor. The campaign went viral, and soon millions were participating, each action serving as a ripple in a vast ocean of change. Technological innovations. Technology had always been a double-edged sword, but Jobin saw its potential for good. He collaborated with scientists and engineers to develop new technologies that were not just advanced but also ethical and sustainable. From clean energy solutions to AI systems that could predict and prevent conflicts, technology became a force for positive change. Spiritual awakening. As important as external changes were, Jobin knew that true transformation had to come from within. He started a series of online workshops and retreats focused on spiritual awakening. The idea was to help people connect with their inner selves, to find that place of peace and wisdom that exists within us all. Global governance. The old systems of governance were proving inadequate for the challenges of the new world. Jobin was part of a team that was working on a new model of global governance, one that was decentralized yet interconnected, allowing for both individual freedom and collective responsibility. The moment of truth. As the year 2030 approached, the world held its breath. It was a symbolic milestone, a point of reckoning. Would the efforts of Jobin and countless others be enough to shift the timeline towards a more positive future? The dawn. And then, as if by some cosmic alignment, things started falling into place. A new treaty on climate change was signed, one that was both ambitious and enforceable. Social justice movements saw unprecedented success, leading to systemic changes in various institutions. People, in general, seemed happier, more at peace with themselves and each other. As he looked at the rising sun from his office window, Jobin felt a sense of awe and gratitude. The path ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in human history, it seemed like the world was moving in the right direction. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking it all in. When he opened them, he knew what he had to do next. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and he was ready to meet it head-on, carrying with him the weight of the world, but also the light of hope, illuminating the path to a future that was not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Jobin sat at his desk, staring at the holographic globe that floated before him. Each pulsating light represented a community that had successfully transitioned to sustainable living. The globe was far from fully lit, but it was brighter than it had ever been. He couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, but also a heavy responsibility. The harmonic shift was in motion, but how could they maintain this momentum? The Harmonic Shift Initiative. Jobin had been instrumental in launching the Harmonic Shift Initiative, a global program aimed at fast-tracking the transition to a sustainable and equitable world. The initiative was a coalition of governments, corporations, and civil society, all committed to the same vision. But Jobin knew that for the shift to be truly harmonic, it had to be organic and come from the heart of each individual. The role of education. He turned his attention to the next big project, education. The current education system was still rooted in the industrial age, focused on producing workers rather than enlightened citizens. Jobin envisioned an education system that nurtured the whole human being: mind, body, and soul. He started working on a blueprint for a global educational reform that emphasized critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and spiritual awareness. The power of community. Jobin believed that the key to a harmonious future lay in the power of community. He initiated a global community day, where people would come together to discuss issues, share resources, and simply celebrate life. The first Community Day was a resounding success, with millions participating worldwide. It became an annual event, a day of global unity and local action. The butterfly effect. As more and more people started living in alignment with the new paradigm, something magical started happening. The butterfly effect took over, small actions leading to significant changes. The rate of deforestation slowed down, renewable energy became the norm, and social inequalities started to diminish. The cosmic alignment. As the year 2030 came to a close, a rare cosmic event was to occur, an alignment of planets that happened once in a millennia. Many believed that this was more than just an astronomical event, that it was a cosmic signal marking the transition to a new era. Future of the planet Earth. Jobin sat in a conference room filled with world leaders, economists, and visionaries. The topic was the world economy, a subject that had long been a source of division and inequality. But Jobin was there to present a new vision, one that would not only sustain the planet but also bring prosperity to all. The circular economy. Linear economies are a thing of the past, Jobin began. We extract, we produce, we consume, and then we discard. This model is not only unsustainable but also unjust. The time has come for a circular economy. He presented a model where waste was minimized, and products were designed to be reused or recycled. In a circular economy, growth doesn't mean more consumption but better quality of life for all. Universal basic income. Jobin then touched on the subject of universal basic income, UBI. In a world where automation and AI are taking over jobs, we need to rethink employment. UBI is not just a safety net, it's a trampoline. It gives people the freedom to pursue what they are passionate about. Decentralized finance. He also introduced the concept of decentralized finance. The current financial system is centralized, leading to a concentration of wealth and power. Through blockchain technology, we can create a financial system that is transparent, inclusive, and equitable. The Green New Deal. Jobin's most ambitious proposal was the Green New Deal, a global initiative to transition to renewable energy while creating millions of jobs. This is not just an environmental policy, it's an economic strategy. It's a win-win for the planet and the people. The global response. The room was silent for a moment after Jobin concluded his presentation. Then, one by one, leaders started to speak, and it became clear that the world was ready for a change. The Harmonic Shift initiative was expanded to include these economic reforms, and a new era of global cooperation began. The ripple effect. As these economic strategies were implemented, the ripple effect was felt worldwide. Poverty rates dropped, social equality improved, and most importantly, the planet started to heal. The global economy was no longer a zero-sum game but a rising tide that lifted all boats. The path forward. As Jobin left the conference room, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. The path to a sustainable, just, and harmonious future was clearer than ever, but it would require continuous effort, cooperation, and above all, a shift in consciousness. The harmonic shift is not a destination but a journey, Jobin thought as he looked out of the window, watching the sun set over a world that was slowly but surely finding its way to harmony and peace. Chapter 1, The Crossroads of Time. In the year 2023, humanity found itself at a crossroads, a juncture where the paths of destiny diverged into a multitude of possibilities. The world was a cacophony of voices, each clamoring for attention, each asserting its own version of the truth. Philosophers, scientists, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike were grappling with questions that Aristotle, Plato, and Confucius would have pondered with great intensity. What is the good life? What is justice? What is the role of the individual in society? And most pressingly, what is the future of our planet? The climate crisis was no longer a distant threat but a palpable reality. Rising sea levels, devastating wildfires, and extreme weather events were the harbingers of a world teetering on the brink. Yet, amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged, a harmonic shift in collective consciousness that sought to illuminate a path toward a future not just sustainable, but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Chapter 2, The Harmonic Shift. The term harmonic shift was coined by Dr. Eleanor Thompson, a philosopher and environmental scientist. She argued that the key to a sustainable future lay not just in technological solutions, but in a fundamental shift in human values and perspectives. Inspired by the Aristotelian concept of eudaimonia, or human flourishing, she proposed a strategy that combined economic growth with social justice and environmental stewardship. Imagine a world where the economy serves the people and the planet, rather than the other way around, she said during a seminal TED Talk. A world where we measure success not just by GDP but by well-being, happiness, and harmony with nature. Chapter 3, The Strategy for Change. The strategy for this harmonic shift was multifaceted. First, there was a push for global cooperation to implement carbon-neutral technologies. Solar grids, wind farms, and hydrogen fuel cells became not just the energy sources of the future but the present. Second, there was a focus on education, teaching the next generation the values of empathy, cooperation, and stewardship for the earth. Third, there was a rethinking of economic systems to include the concept of a universal basic income, UBI, ensuring that no one was left behind in the transition to a new world order. Chapter 4, The Current Timeline and Sudden Decisions. As 2023 turned into 2024, the world was still very much on its current timeline, a path fraught with peril but also laden with opportunity. The decisions made in boardrooms, parliaments, and dinner tables around the world had the power to tip the scales in either direction. A sudden decision to escalate military conflict could plunge the world into chaos, while a breakthrough in clean energy could accelerate the harmonic shift. It was clear that the future was not set in stone, it was a tapestry being woven in real time, each thread representing a choice, an action, a moment. And as the decade progressed toward 2030 and beyond, those threads would come together to form a picture of a world transformed for better or worse dependent on the choices humanity made now. As the calendar pages turned, the world found itself in the year 2025. The harmonic shift was no longer a mere concept but a burgeoning movement. Nations began to awaken to the reality that their fates were interconnected, not just by trade and politics, but by the very air they breathed and the water they drank. Inspired by the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, who once said, "What is good for the bee is good for the hive," countries started to collaborate on an unprecedented scale. International agreements were not just signed but acted upon. The United Nations, once a forum for rhetoric, became a hub of action. Chapter 6, The Ethical Economy. The world economy underwent a transformation, guided by the principles of ethical capitalism. Companies were now evaluated not just on their profitability but also on their social and environmental impact. This was not mere corporate social responsibility, it was a fundamental shift in the way business was conducted. Chapter 7, The Social Fabric. Society itself began to change. The pandemic of the early 2020s had exposed the frailties of existing social systems. Now, inspired by the communitarian ethics of philosophers like John Rawls, new systems were put in place. Universal healthcare, education, and basic income were not just policies but moral imperatives. The gap between the rich and the poor began to close, not through the redistribution of wealth, but through the redistribution of opportunity. Social mobility became a reality, and with it came a decrease in crime, an increase in productivity, and a general sense of well-being. Yet, as 2027 approached, humanity found itself at another crossroads. The harmonic shift had gained momentum, but it was not yet irreversible. Political tension simmered, and the old guard, those who had thrived in the world of exploitation and inequality, were not willing to go quietly into the night. A series of sudden decisions could still derail the progress that had been made. A misstep in international diplomacy, a failure in technological systems, or a resurgence of populist movements could send the world spiraling into chaos. Chapter 9, The Choice. As Aristotle once said, excellence is an art won by training and habituation. The choices made in the next few years would determine the habits that would shape humanity's future. Would the world continue on its current path, risking environmental collapse and social unrest? Or would it embrace the harmonic shift, choosing a future that was not just sustainable but also just, harmonious, and peaceful? The answer lay not in the hands of a few but in the collective will of the many. Each individual had a role to play, each action had a consequence, and each moment was a thread in the tapestry of time. Chapter 10, The Dawn of a New Decade. The year 2030 arrived not with a bang but with a quiet sense of hope. The harmonic shift had reached a critical mass, and the world had begun to change in tangible ways. The air was cleaner, the oceans less polluted, and the forests were slowly regenerating. The world had listened to the wisdom of its philosophers, from Aristotle to Confucius, and had begun to apply their teachings to the modern age. Chapter 11, The Virtuous Cycle. The concept of the virtuous cycle became the guiding principle of this new era. Inspired by the Buddhist philosophy of interconnectedness and the Socratic idea of the examined life, society began to understand that individual well-being was intrinsically linked to the well-being of the community and the planet. Renewable energy was now the norm, and fossil fuels were a relic of the past. The economy had transitioned to a model that valued sustainability and ethical practices. Corporations were now stewards of the environment, and governments were facilitators of social justice. Chapter 12, The Wisdom of the Ages. As the world moved forward, it also looked back, drawing on the wisdom of the ages to navigate the complexities of modern life. Philosophical texts were not just studied in academia but were part of the public discourse. The teachings of great thinkers were integrated into educational curricula, shaping the minds of the next generation. People began to live more meaningful lives, guided by the Aristotelian concept of eudaimonia or flourishing. The pursuit of happiness was no longer about material gain but about living a life of purpose and ethical integrity. Chapter 13, The Precipice of Choice. However, the world was still on the precipice of choice. The harmonic shift had set humanity on a path toward a better future, but the journey was far from over. Political unrest, economic inequality, and environmental challenges still existed, and the potential for sudden, catastrophic decisions remained. Chapter 14, The Power of Now. As the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau once said, the world of reality has its limits, the world of imagination is boundless. The power to shape the future lay in the choices made in the present. Each decision, no matter how small, had the potential to contribute to the harmonic shift or to hinder it. The world had come to understand that the path to a sustainable, just, and peaceful future was not a straight line but a series of zigzags, a dance between progress and setbacks. Yet, the overall direction was clear, and the destination was worth the struggle. Chapter 15, The Tapestry of Time. As the world moved beyond 2030, the tapestry of time continued to be woven with threads of hope and despair, wisdom and folly. Yet, the harmonic shift had become a part of the global zeitgeist. It was as if the teachings of Aristotle, Lao Tzu, and other great philosophers had been distilled into the collective consciousness, guiding humanity like a North Star. Chapter 16, The Age of Enlightenment 2.0. This era came to be known as the Age of Enlightenment 2.0, a nod to the intellectual and cultural movement of the 17th and 18th centuries that had championed reason, science, and individual rights. However, this new enlightenment was not just intellectual but also emotional and spiritual. It recognized the interconnectedness of all things and the importance of balance, much like the Taoist philosophy of yin and yang. Chapter 17, The Economics of Harmony. The world economy had undergone a metamorphosis. The principles of circular economy were now mainstream, inspired by the natural world where waste is a human concept. Products were designed to be reused, recycled, or returned to the earth, creating an economic system in harmony with nature. The gross domestic well-being, GDW, had replaced the gross domestic product, GDP, as the primary measure of a nation's success. It took into account not just economic output but also social, environmental, and psychological well-being. Chapter 18, The Symphony of Cultures. Society had become a symphony of cultures, religions, and philosophies, each contributing its unique melody to the composition of human civilization. The concept of unity in diversity was the cornerstone of this new world, echoing the Platonic idea of the unity of the virtues. Chapter 19, The Razor's Edge. Yet, even in this enlightened age, the world walked on a razor's edge. The potential for regression was ever present, and the consequences of sudden, ill-advised decisions could still be catastrophic. Climate change, though mitigated, had not been entirely reversed. Political tensions, though reduced, had not been entirely eliminated. Chapter 20, The Odyssey continues. As the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forwards. The harmonic shift had set humanity on a path of understanding and action, but the Odyssey was far from over. The choices made in each moment would continue to shape the tapestry of time, determining whether the future would be a utopia, a dystopia, or something in between. Step-by-step plan. Phase 1, Establishing a global framework. Convene a global summit, invite leaders from all nations, along with experts in diplomacy, conflict resolution, climate science, and social welfare, to a summit aimed at creating a global framework for peace and sustainability. Create specialized committees, form committees focused on military de-escalation, climate change, and social issues like hunger and poverty. Each committee should be tasked with drafting actionable plans. Public awareness and support. Use global platforms to inform the public about the summit's objectives and gain public support, which will put pressure on leaders to act responsibly. Phase 2, De-escalation of military and governmental tensions. Ceasefire agreements. Facilitate negotiations to reach immediate ceasefire agreements in conflict zones. Disarmament talks. Initiate talks aimed at reducing nuclear and conventional arms. Conflict resolution. Use diplomatic channels and third-party mediators to address the root causes of conflicts. Transparency measures. Establish a system for governments to transparently share information, reducing misunderstandings and mistrust. Phase 3, Addressing climate change. Global emission targets. Agree on global emission reduction targets based on scientific data. Green technology. Invest in and share green technologies that can be implemented globally. Conservation efforts. Implement global conservation efforts to protect endangered ecosystems. Climate education. Integrate climate education into school curricula worldwide. Phase 4, Eradicating world hunger and poverty. Food distribution networks. Establish efficient food distribution networks to ensure that surplus food reaches those in need. Sustainable agriculture. Invest in sustainable agriculture techniques and share this knowledge with farmers worldwide. Universal basic income. UBI. Explore the feasibility of a global UBI system to address extreme poverty. Job creation. Invest in sectors that are sustainable and can provide jobs to the impoverished communities. Phase 5, Monitoring and accountability. Progress tracking. Establish an independent body to track the progress of each initiative. Transparency reports. Publish annual reports detailing the progress made in each area. Sanctions and rewards. Implement a system of sanctions for non-compliance and rewards for exceeding targets. Public involvement. Keep the global community informed and involved in the process to maintain pressure on leaders to follow through on commitments. Phase 6, Iteration and improvement. Review and revise. Regularly review the effectiveness of policies and make necessary adjustments. Ongoing diplomacy. maintain open channels of communication between nations to address new conflicts and challenges as they arise. Public feedback, continuously collect feedback from the global community to make data-driven decisions. Chapter 1, The Genesis of Future Wave. In the year 2023, Jobin, a young tech entrepreneur with a passion for philosophy and social change, found himself increasingly concerned about the state of the world. Inspired by the teachings of Aristotle, Confucius, and modern thought leaders, he decided to create a platform called Future Wave, aimed at shifting the global timeline towards a more positive, harmonious, and peaceful direction. Chapter 2, The Architecture of Change. Future Wave was not just another social media platform, it was a digital agora, a marketplace of ideas where people could engage in meaningful dialogue. Jobin incorporated elements of gamification, rewarding users for constructive contributions and penalizing divisive or harmful behavior. The platform used advanced algorithms to identify and promote discussions that were geared towards actionable solutions. Chapter 3, The Harmonic Shift Algorithm. Jobin introduced the harmonic shift algorithm, a unique feature that analyzed global trends and identified potential tipping points, moments where collective action could lead to significant positive change. Users could join action pods, small groups focused on specific issues like climate change, social justice, or diplomatic relations, and work together to create and implement solutions. Chapter 4, The Ripple Effect. Within months, Future Wave gained traction. World leaders, scientists, activists, and ordinary citizens flocked to the platform. The action pods started making a real-world impact. They lobbied for policy changes, organized community events, and even funded technological innovations aimed at solving global problems. Jobin realized that Future Wave was becoming a catalyst for the harmonic shift he had envisioned. Chapter 5, The Global Summit. Capitalizing on the platform's success, Jobin organized a virtual global summit via Future Wave. The summit brought together experts and leaders to discuss and finalize action plans for de-escalating military tensions, combating climate change, and eradicating poverty and hunger. The summit concluded with the signing of the Future Wave Accord, a commitment by all participants to work collaboratively towards these goals. Chapter 6, The Power of the Individual. Jobin always believed in the power of the individual to effect change, a concept deeply rooted in existentialist philosophy. Future Wave introduced a feature called Personal Impact Dashboard, which allowed users to track their contributions to various causes, encouraging more people to take action. Chapter 7, The Crossroads. As Future Wave continued to grow, Jobin found himself at a crossroads. The platform had the potential to shift the global timeline positively, but it was also susceptible to misuse. Jobin had to make crucial decisions about data privacy, ethical algorithms, and the platform's commercial aspects. Each choice he made would either contribute to the harmonic shift or hinder it. Chapter 8, The Ethical Compass. Guided by the wisdom of philosophers like Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill, Jobin implemented a robust ethical framework for Future Wave. He ensured that the platform would always prioritize the greater good over profit or popularity, a decision that won him both accolades and criticisms. Chapter 9, The Future Wave Legacy. Years later, as the world welcomed the year 2030, Future Wave had become more than just a platform, it was a movement. It had played a pivotal role in numerous positive changes, from peace treaties to environmental policies. Jobin looked back at his journey and realized that while the path ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, the harmonic shift was no longer a distant dream but a growing reality. Epilogue. Jobin sat in his office, staring at the harmonic shift algorithm dashboard. The indicators were mostly positive, but he knew that the work was far from over. However, he also knew that Future Wave had empowered people to believe in the possibility of a better world. And sometimes, belief was the first step towards actualization. Chapter 21, The Future Wave Phenomenon. As the world moved further into the 2030s, a new phenomenon had begun to shape the global discourse future wave. Created by a visionary named Jobin, this platform had become a catalyst for the harmonic shift, a transformation that was steering humanity towards a future that was not just sustainable but also just, harmonious, and peaceful. Chapter 22, The Confluence of Philosophies. Jobin, an ardent student of philosophy, had designed Future Wave to be a digital agora, a marketplace of ideas where the teachings of Aristotle, Confucius, and modern thought leaders converged. The platform was not just a social network, it was a social experiment, a test of whether the wisdom of the ages could be applied to solve the pressing challenges of the modern world. Chapter 23, The Action Pods. One of the most innovative features of Future Wave was the action pods, small groups that focused on specific issues like climate change, social justice, or diplomatic relations. These pods had become incubators for real-world change, influencing policies, and even shaping international treaties. Chapter 24, The Harmonic Shift in Action. The impact of Future Wave was palpable. Carbon emissions were declining, peace treaties were being signed, and social welfare programs were being implemented at an unprecedented scale. It was as if the world had suddenly woken up to the possibility of a better future, a future that was in line with the harmonic shift that philosophers and visionaries had long dreamed of. Chapter 25, The Ethical Dilemmas. However, the journey was not without its challenges. Jobin found himself grappling with ethical dilemmas that even the great philosophers would have pondered. How to ensure that the platform was not misused. How to balance the commercial aspects with the greater good. Each decision he made was a thread in the tapestry of time, capable of shifting the global timeline in either direction. Chapter 26, The Sudden Decisions. As the world continued to evolve, it became clear that the harmonic shift was still fragile. A sudden decision by a world leader, a technological failure, or a natural disaster could still derail the progress that had been made. The world was walking on a razor's edge, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 27, The Wisdom of the Crowd. Inspired by the Socratic method of dialogue and the Aristotelian concept of practical wisdom, Jobin introduced a new feature on Future Wave called the wisdom of the crowd. This feature allowed users to collectively debate and decide on the best course of action for pressing issues, thereby democratizing the decision-making process. Chapter 28, The Future Wave Accord 2.0. Capitalizing on the platform's success, a second virtual global summit was organized via Future Wave. This summit was focused on solidifying the gains made and planning for the challenges that lay ahead. The summit concluded with the signing of the Future Wave Accord 2.0, a more robust and comprehensive commitment to the harmonic shift. Chapter 29, The Odyssey Continues. As Jobin sat in his office, staring at the harmonic shift algorithm dashboard, he realized that the journey was far from over. The challenges were many, but so were the opportunities. And as long as platforms like Future Wave existed, there was hope that the harmonic shift would continue to gain momentum. Chapter 30, The Tapestry of Time. The tapestry of time continued to be woven, each thread representing a choice, an action, a moment. And as the world moved further into the unknown, it became increasingly clear that the harmonic shift was not just a theoretical concept but a lived reality, a transformation that was shaping the future of planet Earth in ways that were both profound and lasting. The year is 2035, and Future Wave has evolved into more than just a platform, it's a global nexus for change. Jobin, the visionary behind this revolution, sits in his office contemplating the next phase. The harmonic shift is in motion, but the world is at a critical juncture. The choices made now will determine the trajectory for decades to come. Chapter 32, The Philosopher's Code. Inspired by the ethical frameworks of Aristotle and Immanuel Kant, Jobin introduces the Philosopher's Code on Future Wave. This feature allows users to engage in ethical simulations, exploring the potential outcomes of various decisions on global issues. It's a digital exercise in moral philosophy, aimed at cultivating practical wisdom in the user base. Chapter 33, The Quantum Leap. Future Wave integrates quantum computing to analyze vast amounts of data for climate change solutions. This leap in computational power allows for the modeling of complex ecological systems, leading to breakthroughs in sustainable technologies. Jobin believes that the wisdom of the past and the technology of the future can coexist, guiding humanity toward a harmonious existence with nature. Chapter 34, The Diplomatic Channels. Recognizing the need for diplomatic solutions to geopolitical tensions, Future Wave launches diplomatic channels. These are secure, anonymous spaces where diplomats and leaders can discuss sensitive issues without the glare of media and public opinion. The feature is an instant success, leading to several quiet resolutions of conflicts that were on the brink of escalation. Chapter 35, The Universal Basic Assets. Going beyond universal basic income, Future Wave advocates for universal basic assets, UBA, including access to education, healthcare, and even digital assets. The concept gains traction, and several countries begin pilot programs. Jobin sees this as a step closer to a just and equitable world, in line with the philosophies of John Rawls and other thinkers who have emphasized social justice. Chapter 36, The Butterfly Effect. Jobin understands that small actions can have a ripple effect, leading to significant changes over time. Future Wave introduces the butterfly effect feature, which allows users to document and share small but impactful actions they've taken in their communities. These stories serve as inspiration, showing that everyone has a role to play in the harmonic shift. Chapter 37, The Ethical Quandaries. As Future Wave grows, so do the ethical challenges. Issues of data privacy, algorithmic bias, and the potential for misuse loom large. Drawing from the Socratic method of questioning, Jobin initiates a series of public dialogues on these issues, inviting ethicists, technologists, and users to participate. The aim is to arrive at solutions collectively, embodying the democratic ideals that Future Wave stands for. Chapter 38, The Global Resilience Fund. In partnership with international organizations, Future Wave establishes the Global Resilience Fund. This fund is aimed at providing rapid response to natural disasters, economic crises, and other emergencies. It's a safety net for the planet, ensuring that sudden adverse events do not derail the progress humanity has made. Chapter 39, The Crossroads Revisited. As the world approaches the year 2040, Jobin realizes that despite the successes, the harmonic shift is still in a precarious state. The potential for sudden, catastrophic decisions, whether from world leaders, corporations, or even individuals, remains. The next decade will be critical in solidifying the gains and averting potential crises. Chapter 40, The Harmonic Shift Manifesto. Jobin decides to pen the Harmonic Shift Manifesto, a document that outlines the philosophical principles and actionable steps for a sustainable, peaceful, and just future. The manifesto is translated into multiple languages and becomes a global sensation, serving as a blueprint for governments, organizations, and individuals alike. Chapter 41, The Future Wave Odyssey. The year is 2045, and Future Wave has become a cornerstone of global society. Jobin, now a seasoned leader but still a philosopher at heart, is aware that the harmonic shift is an ongoing process. The world has made significant strides, but the path ahead is laden with challenges that require wisdom, foresight, and collective action. Chapter 42, The Wisdom Trees. Inspired by the ancient library of Alexandria and the philosophical schools of Athens, Jobin introduces wisdom trees on Future Wave. These are curated repositories of knowledge, combining ancient wisdom with modern science. Users can explore various branches of knowledge, engage in debates, and contribute their insights, creating a living, breathing library for the digital age. Chapter 43, The Empathy Circles. Drawing from the teachings of Confucius and the Stoics on empathy and virtue, Future Wave launches empathy circles. These are virtual spaces where people from diverse backgrounds can share their experiences and perspectives, fostering a deeper understanding of global issues and cultural nuances. The feature becomes a tool for conflict resolution and social cohesion. Chapter 44, The Eco-Alliance. Recognizing the urgency of environmental conservation, Future Wave forms the Eco-Alliance, a global network of scientists, activists, and policymakers. The alliance focuses on reforestation, ocean conservation, and renewable energy projects. Jobin is inspired by the Native American philosophy of considering the impact of decisions on the next 7 generations. Chapter 45, The Economic Harmonics. Future Wave introduces economic harmonics, a feature that allows users to explore and implement alternative economic models like circular economy, resource-based economy, and donut economics. The aim is to transition from a growth-at-all-costs model to one that values sustainability and well-being, aligning with the teachings of philosophers who advocated for a balanced and just society. Chapter 46, The Quantum Ethics Simulator. Leveraging the power of quantum computing, Future Wave develops a quantum ethics simulator. This tool allows users to simulate the ethical outcomes of various policy decisions, incorporating variables that were previously too complex to model. It becomes an invaluable resource for governments and organizations, echoing Aristotle's notion of practical wisdom. Chapter 47, The Global Citizenship Program. Future Wave collaborates with educational institutions to launch the Global Citizenship Program. This curriculum integrates philosophy, ethics, and global studies, aiming to cultivate a generation of leaders who are not just intelligent but also wise and compassionate. Chapter 48, The Tipping Points. As Future Wave continues to evolve, Jobin realizes that the world is approaching several tipping points. Whether it's climate change, geopolitical tensions, or social inequality, the next few years are crucial. The harmonic shift has momentum, but it also has vulnerabilities. Chapter 49, The Collective Consciousness. Inspired by Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and the Eastern philosophies of interconnectedness, Jobin introduces a feature called collective consciousness. This feature aggregates the sentiments, ideas, and aspirations of users, providing real-time insights into the global mood. It serves as a barometer for the harmonic shift, indicating areas that require immediate attention. Chapter 50, The Harmonic Shift Reaffirmed. Jobin organizes the third Future Wave Global Summit, resulting in the Harmonic Shift Reaffirmation Accord. This document serves as a renewed commitment from world leaders, organizations, and individuals to continue working towards a future that is sustainable, just, and peaceful. Epilogue. Jobin sits in his office, the harmonic shift algorithm dashboard displaying a mix of encouraging and cautionary indicators. He knows that the harmonic shift is a journey, not a destination. As he reflects on the past and contemplates the future, he is filled with a sense of purpose and hope. The harmonic shift may be an ambitious dream, but it's a dream that is increasingly becoming a reality, one choice at a time. Chapter 51, The Future Wave Continuum. The year is 2048, and Future Wave has become an integral part of the global zeitgeist. Jobin, the philosopher-entrepreneur behind this transformative platform, is acutely aware that the harmonic shift is a delicate balance. The world has made progress, but the timeline is still susceptible to sudden shifts, both positive and negative. Chapter 52, The Socratic Dialogues 2.0. Inspired by the Socratic method, Jobin introduces a new feature called Socratic Dialogues 2.0. This virtual space allows users to engage in structured debates, guided by AI moderators trained in ethical reasoning. The aim is to foster critical thinking and ethical decision-making among the global populace. Chapter 53, The Virtue Metrics. Drawing from Aristotle's concept of virtue ethics, Future Wave launches Virtue Metrics. This feature allows users to measure the ethical impact of their actions, both online and offline. It serves as a moral compass, guiding individuals toward choices that contribute to the harmonic shift. Chapter 54, The Peace Ambassadors. Recognizing the need for active peace-building efforts, Future Wave initiates the Peace Ambassadors program. Volunteers from around the world are trained in conflict resolution and diplomacy, then dispatched to regions experiencing tensions. Their efforts lead to several successful peace talks and treaties. Chapter 55, The Global Commons. Future Wave introduces the Global Commons, a feature that allows users to collaboratively manage shared resources like water, air, and energy. Inspired by the tragedy of the commons and the philosophies advocating for communal responsibility, this feature aims to promote sustainable resource management. Chapter 56, The Timeline Scenarios. To help users understand the potential outcomes of current events, Future Wave develops timeline scenarios. These are interactive narratives that allow users to explore the possible futures based on different decisions and actions. The feature is designed to make the abstract concept of timeline shifts more tangible and immediate. Chapter 57, The Wisdom Councils. Jobin establishes Wisdom Councils, groups of experts and thought leaders who regularly review the platform's ethical guidelines and impact. These councils ensure that Future Wave remains aligned with its philosophical foundations while adapting to the ever-changing global landscape. Chapter 58, The Moment of Truth. As the world approaches the mid-century mark, Jobin realizes that humanity is at a pivotal moment. The harmonic shift has made significant progress, but it's also at risk from various threats: climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and technological disruptions. The next few years will be critical in determining the course of history. Chapter 59, The Harmonic Shift Charter. To solidify the global commitment to the harmonic shift, Jobin drafts the Harmonic Shift Charter. This document outlines the ethical principles and actionable steps that governments, organizations, and individuals can take to contribute to a harmonious and sustainable future. The Charter is adopted by numerous countries and becomes a guiding document for global policy. Chapter 60, The Legacy of Choices. Jobin sits in his office, contemplating the intricate web of choices that have led humanity to this moment. The Harmonic Shift algorithm dashboard displays a mix of hopeful and cautionary indicators. He knows that the future is not predetermined, it is shaped by the choices made today. Epilogue. As Jobin gazes out of his window, he reflects on the journey that has brought him and the world to this point. The harmonic shift is no longer a theoretical concept, it's a lived reality for millions. But it's also a responsibility, a collective endeavor that requires constant vigilance and action. With a sense of cautious optimism, he turns back to his desk, ready to face the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Chapter 61, The Future Wave Renaissance. The year is 2050, and Future Wave has become a global institution. Jobin, the visionary behind this transformative platform, knows that the harmonic shift is a continuous journey. Despite the progress, the world is still susceptible to sudden shifts that could either propel humanity forward or set it back. Chapter 62, The Ethical AI Guardians. In a groundbreaking move, Jobin introduces ethical AI guardians to Future Wave. These AI entities are programmed to uphold ethical standards and intervene when discussions or actions on the platform risk causing harm. They are a digital embodiment of the philosophical guardians that Plato envisioned for his ideal society. Chapter 63, The Global Brain Network. Inspired by the interconnected neurons in a brain, Future Wave launches the Global Brain Network. This feature allows users to collaboratively solve complex problems in real time, pooling intellectual resources to tackle issues like climate change, poverty, and social injustice. It's a manifestation of collective intelligence, a concept deeply rooted in Eastern and Western philosophies. Chapter 64, The Harmony Index. Future Wave introduces the Harmony Index, a comprehensive metric that measures the level of peace, justice, and sustainability in various regions around the world. The index serves as a guide for governments and organizations, helping them allocate resources more effectively to areas that need it most. Chapter 65, The Future Wave Academies. To foster education and critical thinking, Future Wave establishes a series of online academies. These institutions offer courses in philosophy, ethics, science, and arts, aiming to cultivate well-rounded individuals who can contribute meaningfully to society. Chapter 66, The Timeline Guardians. Recognizing the fragility of the harmonic shift, Jobin creates a special task force known as the Timeline Guardians. Composed of experts in various fields, this group is responsible for monitoring global events and advising on actions that could help maintain the positive timeline humanity is on. Chapter 67, The Universal Wisdom Archive. Jobin initiates the Universal Wisdom Archive, a digital repository that aims to preserve the philosophical and ethical teachings of all cultures. This archive is accessible to everyone, serving as a constant reminder of the collective wisdom that has guided humanity through the ages. Chapter 68, The Crucible Moments. As the world navigates the complexities of the mid-century, Jobin understands that humanity is at a series of crucible moments. These are pivotal points that could either solidify the gains made in the harmonic shift or unravel them. The next decade will be decisive. Chapter 69, The Harmonic Shift Covenant. To reaffirm the world's commitment to a harmonious future, Jobin drafts the Harmonic Shift Covenant. This global agreement outlines the responsibilities of each nation in maintaining peace, justice, and sustainability. It becomes a cornerstone in international law, guiding future actions and policies. Chapter 70, The Infinite Game. Jobin sits in his office, pondering the concept of the infinite game, a term coined by philosopher James P. Carse. Unlike finite games with clear winners and losers, the harmonic shift is an infinite game, one that humanity will continue to play for generations to come. Chapter 81, The Future Wave Nexus. The year is 2055, and Future Wave has evolved into more than just a platform, it's a global ecosystem for change. Jobin, the philosopher-entrepreneur, understands that the harmonic shift is a continuous, fragile journey. The world has made incredible strides, but the timeline remains susceptible to sudden shifts. Chapter 82, The Ethical Decision Trees. Inspired by decision theory and ethical frameworks, Jobin introduces ethical decision trees on Future Wave. These interactive tools guide users through complex ethical dilemmas, offering philosophical perspectives and potential outcomes to help them make informed decisions. Chapter 83, The Compassion Quotient. Drawing from the teachings of various spiritual traditions on compassion, Future Wave launches the Compassion Quotient. This feature measures and encourages empathetic interactions on the platform, aiming to cultivate a culture of kindness and understanding. Chapter 84, The Future Wave Marketplace. Recognizing the power of economic incentives, Future Wave introduces a marketplace where users can purchase sustainable and ethically produced goods. A portion of each transaction goes into the Impact Fund, further fueling social and environmental projects. Chapter 85, The Collective Wisdom Engine. Future Wave unveils the Collective Wisdom Engine, a feature that synthesizes the insights and solutions generated by its users into actionable strategies. These strategies are then presented to governments and organizations, offering a crowdsourced approach to problem solving. Chapter 86, The Timeline Navigators. To help steer humanity through the complexities of the mid-century, Jobin establishes a group of timeline navigators. Comprising experts in ethics, science, and policy, this group works behind the scenes to guide the world toward the most positive, harmonious, and peaceful timeline. Chapter 87, The Universal Code of Ethics. Jobin collaborates with philosophers, ethicists, and religious leaders to draft a universal code of ethics. This document serves as a moral compass for humanity, outlining the ethical principles that should guide individual and collective actions. Chapter 88, The Crossroads. As the world navigates the complexities of the mid-century, Jobin understands that humanity is at a critical crossroads. The harmonic shift has made significant progress, but it's also at risk from various threats: climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and technological disruptions. The next few years will be decisive. Chapter 89, The Harmonic Shift Alliance. To solidify global commitment to a harmonious future, Jobin initiates the Harmonic Shift Alliance. This global alliance allows nations to commit to specific, measurable actions that contribute to peace, justice, and sustainability. It becomes a cornerstone in international relations, inspiring collective action. Chapter 90, The Eternal Spiral. Jobin sits in his office, contemplating the concept of the eternal spiral, a never-ending cycle of growth, setbacks, and renewed efforts. Unlike a linear path with a defined endpoint, the harmonic shift is an ongoing spiral, one that requires continuous engagement and adaptation. Chapter 91, The Future Wave Constellation. The year is 2058, and Future Wave has become a constellation of interconnected platforms, each focusing on different aspects of human life and global challenges. Jobin, the philosopher-entrepreneur, knows that the harmonic shift is a never-ending journey, one that requires constant vigilance and innovation. Chapter 92, The Ethical Simulations. Inspired by thought experiments in philosophy, Jobin introduces ethical simulations on Future Wave. These are virtual environments where users can explore the consequences of different ethical choices, gaining a deeper understanding of moral dilemmas and their implications. Chapter 93, The Empathy Chambers. Drawing from the teachings of compassion and understanding, Future Wave launches empathy chambers. These are virtual spaces where people from conflicting backgrounds can engage in mediated dialogues, fostering empathy and reducing prejudice. Chapter 94, The Future Wave Exchange. Recognizing the power of economic systems to drive change, Future Wave introduces an exchange where users can trade in a new digital currency tied to ethical and sustainable actions. This currency can be used to fund projects that align with the goals of the harmonic shift. Chapter 95, The Wisdom Aggregator. Future Wave unveils the Wisdom Aggregator, a feature that compiles the most insightful contributions from its users into a searchable database. This resource is made available to policymakers, academics, and organizations, providing them with a wealth of collective wisdom to inform their decisions. Chapter 96, The Timeline Architects. To help guide humanity through the labyrinth of possible futures, Jobin establishes a team of timeline architects. These experts in ethics, futurology, and systems thinking work to design potential pathways that could lead to the most positive, harmonious, and peaceful timeline. Chapter 97, The Universal Principles of Justice. Jobin collaborates with legal experts and ethicists to draft the Universal Principles of Justice. This document serves as a foundation for legal systems around the world, aiming to create a more equitable and just global society. Chapter 98, The Fork in the Road. As the world navigates the complexities of the late 21st century, Jobin understands that humanity is at a crucial fork in the road. The harmonic shift has made significant progress, but it's also at risk from various threats: climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and technological disruptions. The choices made in the next few years will be pivotal. Chapter 99, The Harmonic Shift Symposium. To galvanize global commitment to a harmonious future, Jobin organizes the Harmonic Shift Symposium. This global event brings together leaders, thinkers, and activists to discuss and commit to specific actions that contribute to peace, justice, and sustainability. Chapter 100, The Ongoing Journey. Jobin sits in his office, contemplating the concept of the ongoing journey, a path without a final destination but filled with meaningful milestones. The harmonic shift is such a journey, one that requires the collective efforts of humanity to navigate its twists and turns. Chapter 114, The Future Wave Trusts. Recognizing the need for long-term investment in sustainable projects, Future Wave introduces trusts. These are funds that are set aside to support projects that align with the goals of the harmonic shift, providing both financial and advisory support. Chapter 115, The Wisdom Compiler. Future Wave unveils the Wisdom Compiler, a feature that uses advanced algorithms to distill the collective wisdom of its user base into concise, actionable guidelines. These guidelines are then published in various formats, from academic papers to policy briefs, to inform decision-making at all levels. Chapter 116, The Timeline Guardians. To help guide humanity through the intricate web of possible futures, Jobin establishes a council of timeline guardians. These are individuals from diverse backgrounds who are trained in ethics, futurology, and diplomacy. They act as mediators and advisors in critical situations that could affect the timeline. Chapter 117, The Universal Covenant of Coexistence. Jobin collaborates with leaders from various religious and spiritual traditions to draft the Universal Covenant of Coexistence. This document outlines the fundamental principles that should guide human interaction and coexistence, aiming to foster a more peaceful and harmonious world. Chapter 118, The Crucible. As the world navigates the complexities of the late 21st century, Jobin understands that humanity is at a crucible moment. The harmonic shift has made significant progress, but it's also at risk from various threats: climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and technological disruptions. The choices made in the next few years will be pivotal. Chapter 119, The Harmonic Shift Festivals. To celebrate the beauty of life and the potential for positive change, Jobin initiates the Harmonic Shift Festivals. These are global events that combine art, music, and intellectual discourse to inspire people to take action towards a more harmonious future. Chapter 120, The Infinite Game. Jobin sits in his office, contemplating the concept of the infinite game, a journey without a final destination but one that is full of learning, growth, and adaptation. The harmonic shift is such a game, one that requires the collective efforts of humanity to keep playing. Epilogue. As Jobin looks at the harmonic shift algorithm dashboard, he feels a sense of cautious optimism. The indicators are mostly positive, but he knows that the journey is far from over. However, as he reflects on the past and looks toward the future, he realizes that the harmonic shift is not just a dream but a growing reality. It's a testament to the power of collective wisdom and action, a beacon of hope in a complex world. The year is 2063, and Future Wave has become a universe of its own, a complex web of initiatives, platforms, and communities all aimed at fostering a better future. Jobin, the philosopher-entrepreneur, knows that the harmonic shift is a journey that requires the collective wisdom and action of humanity. Chapter 112, The Ethical Labyrinths. Inspired by the moral mazes of philosophy, Jobin introduces ethical labyrinths on Future Wave. These are interactive experiences that guide users through complex ethical scenarios, offering multiple paths and outcomes based on different philosophical principles. Chapter 1, The Year 2023, The Present Moment. Jobin sat at his desk, surrounded by a sea of monitors displaying real-time data, news feeds, and scientific reports. The room was dimly lit, save for the glow of the screens. His eyes darted from one window to another, absorbing the latest updates on climate change, socio-political movements, and technological advancements. He was a data analyst by profession but a futurist at heart. Jobin had always been fascinated by the idea of predicting the future based on current trends. But lately, the data had become increasingly grim, painting a picture of a future that was both uncertain and unsettling. Climate change. The most immediate concern was climate change. According to the latest IPCC reports, if humanity continued on its current path, global temperatures would rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. This would result in more frequent and severe weather events, including hurricanes, droughts, and wildfires. Sea levels would rise, displacing millions of people living in coastal areas. Jobin knew that mitigation strategies were in place, but they were not enough. Renewable energy was growing, but not at the pace required to offset carbon emissions. Geoengineering solutions, like carbon capture, were still in their infancy. Society and technology. On another monitor, Jobin read about the latest advancements in artificial intelligence and automation. While these technologies had the potential to revolutionize industries and improve quality of life, they also posed ethical dilemmas and the risk of job displacement on a massive scale. Society was becoming increasingly polarized. Social media algorithms had created echo chambers, reinforcing people's existing beliefs and isolating them from differing viewpoints. Jobin worried about the erosion of democratic values and the rise of authoritarian regimes, fueled by misinformation and fear. The planet. The planet's biodiversity was also at risk. Deforestation, pollution, and habitat loss were driving countless species to extinction. The loss of biodiversity could destabilize ecosystems and result in unforeseen consequences, potentially triggering a domino effect that would be catastrophic for all life on Earth. Jobin's quest. As he sat there, absorbing the weight of the information before him, Jobin felt a sense of urgency. He realized that understanding the signs for what they actually meant was the first step in changing the course of the future. He couldn't do it alone, but he could contribute by synthesizing this data into actionable insights. He began to type, crafting a report that he would share with policymakers, scientists, and anyone willing to listen. It was a small step, but it was a start. And in a world teetering on the edge of so many possible futures, Jobin knew that every step counted. And the jukebox only played songs that were at least 20 years old. He had a glass of bourbon in front of him, and he stared into it as if it held the secrets of the universe or at least some kind of escape from the madness that was the world outside. "Damn it all," he muttered, taking a swig. "We're dancing on the edge of a razor blade, and nobody seems to give a damn." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the latest headlines. Wildfires in Australia. Political unrest in the United States. A refugee crisis in Europe. It was as if the world had become a powder keg, just waiting for a spark to set it off. The climate abyss. The climate was going to hell, and fast. Jobin had read the reports, seen the data. The earth was warming, and we were the fools stoking the fire. Sure, there were efforts to transition to renewable energy, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. The planet was on a one-way ticket to a climate catastrophe, and humanity was too busy arguing about politics to do anything about it. Society's fracture. And then there was the social fabric, tearing at the seams. Automation and AI were advancing at a breakneck pace, promising a future of untold convenience and comfort. But at what cost? Millions would lose their jobs, replaced by machines that never slept, never complained, never asked for a raise. The divide between the haves and the have-nots was growing wider by the day. The rich got richer, hoarding wealth like dragons sitting on a pile of gold, while the poor were left to fight over the scraps. The planet's lament. The planet itself was crying out for help. Species were going extinct at an alarming rate, ecosystems were collapsing, and yet humanity continued its relentless march of consumption and destruction. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and Jobin felt helpless to stop it. Jobin's revelation. He downed the last of his bourbon and slammed the glass on the table. Enough was enough. He couldn't sit idly by and watch the world burn. He had to do something, anything, to shake people out of their complacency. He pulled out his laptop and began to write. It was a manifesto of sorts, a call to arms for anyone who would listen. He poured all of his fears, his frustrations, his hopes, and his dreams into the words, typing as if possessed by the spirits of Bukowski and Thompson themselves. When he was done, he hit publish and closed his laptop. It was a small act, but it was a start. And in a world teetering on the brink of chaos, sometimes a start was all you needed. As he walked out of the bar, Jobin felt a strange sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but it wasn't written in stone. There was still time to change course, to steer the ship away from the iceberg. And so, Jobin stepped into the night, ready to face whatever came next. After all, the future was a book yet to be written, and he was determined to make sure it had a happy ending. Chapter 3, The Gonzo Epiphany, a Bukowski-Thompson Reckoning. Jobin found himself in a desert, miles away from civilization, his car parked haphazardly on the side of a dusty road. The sky was a canvas of stars, each one a silent witness to the madness unfolding on Earth. He lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and exhaled a plume of smoke that mingled with the dry air. Here I am, he thought, a speck of cosmic dust in an indifferent universe, trying to make sense of a world hell-bent on its own destruction. Climate's last stand. He pondered the climate crisis, the ticking time bomb that humanity seemed intent on ignoring. Renewable energy was gaining traction, but it was a race against time. The planet was heating up, ice caps were melting, and extreme weather events were becoming the norm rather than the exception. Jobin knew that if drastic measures weren't taken soon, the point of no return would be crossed. The social quagmire. Society was another beast altogether. The rise of AI and automation promised a utopia of efficiency and convenience, but at the cost of human labor and dignity. Jobin envisioned a future where the gap between the rich and the poor would become an insurmountable chasm, leading to social unrest and upheaval. Earth's silent scream. As for the planet, its biodiversity was in a state of rapid decline. The extinction of species wasn't just a loss for the natural world, it was a sign of a broken system, a warning that the delicate balance of life was being irrevocably disrupted. Jobin's Gonzo awakening. Suddenly, it hit him. A Gonzo awakening, fueled by the spirits of Bukowski and Thompson. He realized that the key to changing the future lay in challenging the status quo, in questioning the narratives that society took for granted. He opened his laptop and began to write, his fingers dancing across the keyboard like a pianist in the throes of a frenzied solo. He wrote about the need for a paradigm shift, for a new way of thinking that prioritized sustainability over profit, compassion over competition, and long-term survival over short-term gains. When he was done, he hit publish and closed his laptop. It felt like dropping a pebble into a pond, knowing that the ripples would spread far and wide. The road ahead. As he drove back to civilization, Jobin felt a newfound sense of purpose. The future was uncertain, but that was no reason to give in to despair. The world was teetering on the edge, but it was still possible to pull it back from the brink. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and setbacks, but he was ready to face them head-on. Armed with the gonzo spirit of Bukowski and Thompson, Jobin was determined to play his part in writing a future that was worth living for. And so, as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Jobin sped down the highway, a lone crusader in a world desperately in need of heroes. Chapter 2, The Razor's Edge, a Bukowski-Thompson Odyssey. Jobin sat in a dimly lit bar, the kind of place where the wallpaper had absorbed decades of cigarette smoke and the jukebox only played songs that were at least 20 years old. He had a glass of bourbon in front of him, and he stared into it as if it held the secrets of the universe or at least some kind of escape from the madness that was the world outside. "Damn it all," he muttered, taking a swig. "We're dancing on the edge of a razor blade, and nobody seems to give a damn." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the latest headlines. Wildfires in Australia. Political unrest in the United States. A refugee crisis in Europe. It was as if the world had become a powder keg, just waiting for a spark to set it off. The climate abyss. The climate was going to hell, and fast. Jobin had read the reports, seen the data. The earth was warming, and we were the fools stoking the fire. Sure, there were efforts to transition to renewable energy, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. The planet was on a one-way ticket to a climate catastrophe, and humanity was too busy arguing about politics to do anything about it. Society's fracture. And then there was the social fabric, tearing at the seams. Automation and AI were advancing at a breakneck pace, promising a future of untold convenience and comfort. But at what cost? Millions would lose their jobs, replaced by machines that never slept, never complained, never asked for a raise. The divide between the haves and the have-nots was growing wider by the day. The rich got richer, hoarding wealth like dragons sitting on a pile of gold, while the poor were left to fight over the scraps. The planet's lament. The planet itself was crying out for help. Species were going extinct at an alarming rate, ecosystems were collapsing, and yet humanity continued its relentless march of consumption and destruction. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and Jobin felt helpless to stop it. Jobin's revelation. He downed the last of his bourbon and slammed the glass on the table. Enough was enough. He couldn't sit idly by and watch the world burn. He had to do something, anything, to shake people out of their complacency. He pulled out his laptop and began to write. It was a manifesto of sorts, a call to arms for anyone who would listen. He poured all of his fears, his frustrations, his hopes, and his dreams into the words, typing as if possessed by the spirits of Bukowski and Thompson themselves. When he was done, he hit publish and closed his laptop. It was a small act, but it was a start. And in a world teetering on the brink of chaos, sometimes a start was all you needed. As he walked out of the bar, Jobin felt a strange sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but it wasn't